Chapter 1085. This was a very strange world. Islands floated in the sky. Rivers flowed through space like ribbons. Strange plants covered the entire land. The air was filled with an indescribable freshness. In such a world, in a corner of the sky high above, Noah, equipped with Hermes boots, hovered there. Looking at this extremely strange environment, he more or less exclaimed in amazement. So this is Idris. After making the decision to go to Idris, Noah immediately received help from Mr. Gang and found out how to enter this world. There were many ways to enter Idris. But no matter which one it wasn't something that could be done so easily. Thus, Mr. Gang suggested to Noah that they might as well fly into this world through the hole in anima that hadn't completely closed yet. Super Secondary Spatial Magic Anima. This spell was originally based on the principle of opening up a void between Azrand and Edris and absorbing the mana of Azrand into Edris, materializing it into magic crystals and teleporting it to the capital of Edris. Although anima was cut in half by Noah's demon slayer after it was activated, the hole wasn't completely closed. Thus, Noah followed Mr. Gang's suggestion and flew into the hole in anima using Hermes boots. After passing through the hole of anima, this was the scene that appeared in front of Noah. Just as Mr. Gang said, there's no mana in the air of this world. Noah expanded his senses. Everywhere he went, there wasn't a single inch of mana. It was completely different from Azrand, who could more or less feel a trace of mana in everything. The magic power of this world is stored in the earth, but I can't even feel any trace of magic power in the earth, Noah said thoughtfully. Looks like Mr. Gang was right. The mana of this world is probably all gathered in the capital. At this point, it was necessary to talk about the background of this world. Unlike the complicated situation in Azrand, there were two powers in this world of Idris. One was the kingdom that ruled the entire continent and all the humans in this world, the kingdom of Idris. The other was a gigantic island that floated in the skies above the Azeroth continent. It was an island called Extania. They ruled over the humans of Azeroth and were a race that called themselves angels, the Transcendents. The Surpassers were the only race in this world that could store mana and use the flying spell, Wings. It was precisely because Transcendents were the only race in this world that could store mana within themselves that they could call themselves angels and claim to be in charge of the humans of Edris. As for the origin of this race, when he heard that the people of this race could use the flying magic called Wings, Noah more or less had a guess. Not to mention, when he mentioned the Surpassers, Mr. Gang kept glancing at Xia Lulu and Hubby, which made Noah more certain of what this race of Surpassers was like. Naturally, Noah wasn't interested in the Surpassers' origin at all. However, Noah's target was the culprit behind the anima. The one who came up with the plan to use the anima to absorb mana from Azrand and even convert the humans of Azrand into pure mana was the queen of the Surpassers. He ruled over both humans and angels, and was known as God by both races. But that guy from Mishgang, he clearly said that he would bring me here, but where did he go? Undoubtedly, Noah was with Mr. Gang when he passed through the anima. However, when he arrived at Edris, Noah realized that Mr. Gang wasn't with him at all. He was alone. Could it be that the anima's teleportation is random, and only mana is fixed to the capital? Or is it because of my resistance to spells? It couldn't be helped. The anima was a spell after all. Although it was a super spell that was much more powerful than normal spells, it wasn't certain if it would work on Noah. If Noah's physique had any effect on the anima's teleportation when he passed through the anima's hole, then it wasn't impossible for such a problem to occur. Additionally, there was another problem. Thinking of something that Mr. Gang had solemnly told him before entering Edris, Noah raised a hand and activated the terrifying amount of mana stored in his mana source. In the next moment, a beautiful magic formation spun from Noah's hand. Seeing this, Noah smiled. Isn't it still possible to use magic? According to Mr. Gang, the sorcerers from Aslan were unable to use magic in Edris. However, Noah was obviously not one of them. After all, the magic cannon that Noah used was technically magic and not magic. Secondly, Noah's constitution wouldn't allow such a thing to happen. In the past, Makarov had said that Noah had 3 main constitutions. First, he was immune to all negative energy. Second, he could tyrannically absorb energy that entered his body. Third, he could not rely on external forces to recover energy that he had expended. The first constitution proved that Noah's body was extremely exclusive. The second constitution proved that Noah's body was extremely tolerant. The third constitution proved that Noah's body was extremely independent. With the first and third constitutions, Noah's battle prowess would not be affected by external forces. Not to mention, as long as it was a world, it wouldn't reject Noah. Don't you see that even Noah's authority world is trying its best to actively adapt so that Noah can use the power that can kill gods without any scruples a month later? That was why Noah wasn't worried about this problem at all. Looks like I won't be able to use the little gadgets that Mr. Gang prepared to allow the sorcerers of Aslan to use magic normally. Noah played with a small red pill in his hand before throwing it away and looking around. Anyway, let's fly to a city with people first. We'll talk about it after we confirm the location of the imperial capital. After saying that, Noah controlled Hermes' boots, and his body turned into a stream of light and flew in one of the directions. Even though he didn't know how vast the continent of Edras was, Noah didn't find a single place with people after flying for a whole hour. By the time they found a decent-looking town, it was already 3 hours later. Walking on the streets that were slightly less populated, Noah's brows furrowed deeply. That was because around Noah, people were pointing at Noah's direction. Hey, look at the back of that person's hand, isn't that the guild emblem of Fairy Tale? Don't tell me he's a sorcerer from Fairy Tale. Liar, how would someone from that guild dare to show off their guild emblem so openly? That's right. Is he trying to court death? Don't talk about it. Even if he's not a sorcerer from Fairy Tale, he's still dead with that emblem on his body. That's right. As the conversation unfolded, the surrounding residents first cast sympathetic gazes at Noah. Then, as though unwilling to be implicated, they walked away as far as they could. So that's how it is, Noah narrowed his eyes. It seems that in this world, Fairy Tale is not very popular. This matter was quickly verified. Over there. A series of loud and chaotic footsteps suddenly sounded from afar. A fully equipped squad of soldiers holding standard pikes suddenly charged towards Noah's direction and surrounded him. Chapter 1086. Don't move. Pointing the standard pikes in their hands at Noah, the fully armed soldiers surrounded Noah in a circular formation. Sharp pikes were pointed at Noah from all directions. Unless he could fly, he would not be able to escape. Of course, that was under the condition that he did not charge out. Noah only stopped in his tracks. Not only did he not try to escape before he was surrounded, he even waited for the soldiers to surround him. Looking at the fully armed soldiers, the corner of his mouth twitched. Royal Army. Royal Army. As the name suggested, it was the army that obeyed the kingdom. In this world, due to the exhaustion of magic, the use of magic was banned under the king's order. Even if one only possessed magic, it would be considered a crime. In this world, the so-called magic referred to magic weapons and tools that were embedded with magic crystals that stored magic power. So, as long as one possessed magic, the moment they were found out, they would end up in prison. This order seemed to be protecting rare animals and forbidding people from harming them, but in reality, it was only the kingdom's selfishness that caused trouble. The king had banned everyone from possessing magic, but in the capital where he lived, he could use magic as he pleased, and even abuse it. This was simply a disguised form of monopolization. Yet, there was only one kingdom in this world, and everyone was under the rule of the kingdom. Naturally, the citizens of Edras who were treated so differently could only be angry, but not say anything. In order to prevent the precious magic power from being used by the commoners and monopolize the magic power of this continent, the kingdom had stationed troops in every city and town. Come to think of it, these soldiers should be the royal army stationed in this town. Seeing that Noah was surrounded without any resistance, one of the soldiers, who was obviously the leader, took a step forward and spoke sternly. "Are you the sorcerer of Fairy Tale?" From the attitude of the royal army and the surrounding citizens, Noah could say with certainty that Fairy Tale in this world was not doing well. Moreover, it was obvious that they were against the kingdom. "You're asking me if I'm a sorcerer from Fairy Tale?" Noah gently stroked the back of his hand that was branded with the guild's emblem. He raised his head and suddenly smiled. "That's right, I'm a sorcerer from Fairy Tale." Tisk. The captain was so angry that he was speechless. "You actually admitted it so brazenly. Are you looking down on our royal army?" However, as soon as he finished speaking, the captain felt his vision blur. A figure appeared without any warning. Then, a hand suddenly reached out and grabbed his neck. "You're saying that I'm underestimating you?" Along with this cold voice, the captain did not even have time to react. The hand that was choking the captain's neck slightly exerted force and slowly lifted him up. "It should be said that you guys are looking down on Fairy Tale, right? Since when can't the sorcerer of Fairy Tale openly admit her identity?" The cold voice wormed its way into the captain's ears, causing him to finally feel the tight grip on his neck and the suffocating feeling of his entire body being lifted into the air. At that moment, his feet that were suspended in the air started kicking nonstop as he grabbed tightly onto Noah's hand and let out a muffled groan of pain. "Captain!" The royal army surrounding Noah did not even notice when Noah had moved. They only felt that Noah had disappeared all of a sudden. Then, their captain's neck was choked by Noah with one hand. With his astonishing arm strength, his entire body was lifted into the air by the hand that was choking him. At that moment, the group of royal soldiers was slightly flustered. They tried to put on a brave front as they called out to Noah. "Let go of the captain. Damned Fairy Tale sorcerer. How dare you go against the royal army? You have a death wish." Although they were shouting like this, the soldiers who were holding the standard pikes did not dare to step forward at all. There was no other reason other than the fact that their captain was still in the opponent's hands. Casting a glance at the clamoring royal soldiers, Noah raised his hand and threw the captain of the soldiers in his hand like a bowling ball towards a corner of the royal soldiers who had surrounded him. Bam! With a muffled sound, the captain, who had been thrown into the air, suddenly crashed into a group of soldiers, smashing one of the royal army members who had surrounded Noah into a complete mess. Seeing this, the royal army members who had not been hit were actually delighted instead of shocked. "He's let go of the captain. Go, quick!" Thus, the group of royal army members picked up the standard pikes in their hands without hesitation and charged towards Noah without a shred of mercy. Seeing the group of royal army members charging towards him, Noah raised his brows. "Just as well. Let me get some information from you." Mishgang had already told Noah the general information about Edris. However, no matter what, they could not possibly have even prepared a map, could they? Therefore, Noah still needed someone to lead the way for him. Weren't these royal army members before him the most suitable candidates? At that moment, Noah raised a hand, and the air around him began to flash with streaks of golden light. It was the precursor to the opening of the gate of Babylon. Whoosh! At this moment, a long whip that seemed to be made entirely of fluorescent light suddenly flashed through the air, slicing through the air and lashing viciously towards the group of royal army members who were charging towards Noah. Smack! The royal army members charging towards Noah were clearly not even at the standard of a typical sorcerer. Faced with such a surprise attack, they did not even have the most basic reaction. They were struck by the long whip that sliced through the air, and were once again thrown off their horses. Noah was slightly taken aback. At this moment, a light and somewhat rude voice rang out from beside him. "What are you still standing there for?" Hearing the voice, Noah instinctively looked over. He saw that at the entrance of an alley beside the street, a young girl was holding the handle of a long whip in her hand, glaring angrily at Noah. "Come over here quickly." Hearing that, not only did Noah not go over as he was told, he even stood there stunned and called out in surprise. "Lucy?" "Yes." The one standing at the entrance of the alley, holding the handle of the long whip in her hand, was Lucy. "Lucy?" The royal army members who had been thrown off their horses by the long whip all turned their heads and looked in Lucy's direction. Then, one by one, they began to shout. "Lucy! It's Lucy! It's Lucy from Fairy Tale!" Lucy instantly smacked her lips, not caring about her image at all. With a shake of her hand, she withdrew the long whip and immediately rushed to Noah's side. She viciously grabbed the collar of the dazed Noah and pulled him to the other side of the street. "This way!" Noah was almost out of breath from being pulled. As he allowed Lucy to drag him along and run wildly, there was only one thought in his mind. Since when did the timid Lucy become so violent? "Over there. Over there. Let's go over there and take a look." On the streets of the town, troops of the royal army ferociously chased back and forth, scaring the townsfolk into hiding in their homes, not daring to come out. Meanwhile, in an alley, Lucy was hiding in the shadows, her hand tightly wrapped around Noah's neck, pulling Noah's entire head into her embrace. An indescribable softness suddenly attacked Noah's nerves, causing Noah to quiver and quickly struggle. This struggle caused Lucy to moan softly instead. Her pretty face blushed, and she growled fiercely. "Stop rubbing. Idiot! Do you want to be discovered?" Noah's movements paused. It was not that Noah was very obedient, but this violent tone of Lucy's that was completely different from the one in his memory had caused him to be a little confused. No matter what, although Lucy usually played the role of a roast and was a little timid, at least she was still feminine. However, what was up with this standard tomboyish Lucy? Suddenly, Noah's heart skipped a beat. This Lucy, could it be Lucy from Idris? Chapter 1087. After an unknown amount of time, the frequent and chaotic footsteps that resounded through the streets slowly faded away. In the alley, Lucy poked her head out and cautiously observed her surroundings. When she was certain that there were no royal soldiers nearby, she secretly heaved a sigh of relief and released the head in her arms. "All right, it should be fine for now." Noah, who had been released, almost subconsciously distanced himself from Lucy immediately, and then took a deep breath. Just now, Noah had almost suffocated to death. Lucy, on the other hand, did not seem to mind that she had given Noah quite a lot of benefits. She put her hands on her hips and raised her eyebrows. After sizing up Noah for a moment, the corners of her lips curled up somewhat crudely. "Good lad, you actually have the guts to pretend to be someone from Fairy Tale. Aren't you afraid that you will really be captured by the royal army?" Hearing this, Noah, who had finally caught his breath, finally saw the full appearance of the Lucy before him clearly. Whether it was her appearance, figure, or waist-length hair, she was exactly the same as the Lucy that Noah knew. However, the Lucy before him not only had a valiant aura about her, even the way she was dressed was completely different from the Lucy in Noah's impression. It was a pitch-black outfit. Rather than saying that it was revealing, it was better to say that it was focused on the principle of ease of movement. It seemed to have been meticulously designed in a tight-fitting leather outfit. In Noah's impression, Lucy was a girl after all, and would more or less pay attention to her appearance. However, on this valiant Lucy in front of him, Noah did not see that she cared much about her girl's upbringing at all. She was just a strong woman. Seeing that the other party was blatantly sizing him up with an unceremonious gaze, Noah felt a little uncomfortable, but at the same time, he was basically certain. This Lucy was not the Lucy that Noah knew. If there were no surprises, this should be the Lucy in this world of Edras. Why aren't you saying anything? Seeing that Noah was silent, Lucy raised an eyebrow and directly reached out her hand to grab Noah's collar. She pressed her forehead against Noah's and sneered valiantly. Do you think you'll be fine if you don't say anything? I won't let this matter of you impersonating someone from a fairy tale go. Hearing this, Noah finally came back to his senses. Looking at Lucy, who had put her face in front of him and was smiling viciously, his emotions gradually calmed down. Impersonating someone from a fairy tale. Noah reached out his hand and grabbed Lucy's hand that was grabbing onto his collar. With a slight tug, he pried her hand away. Don't joke, I am the sorcerer from fairy tale. Looking at Lucy's expression, of course, Lucy, yes. 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 Lucy suddenly fell silent. Both of their hands were held tightly together and their eyes met without any avoidance. Both of them remained silent, as if trying to read something from each other's eyes, causing the atmosphere to become oppressive. It was only after a long while that Lucy curled her lips. It doesn't look like I'm lying. Do you think I would say that? Up to you, I don't need anyone's approval. Noah slowly let go of Lucy's hand and turned around. However, I still have to thank you for helping me out of this predicament. Although there was no need for it. After saying that, Noah was about to walk out of the alley. However, Lucy was moved. She grabbed Noah's hand again and said, "Don't worry. Are you crazy? There are still people from the royal army outside." And then Noah glanced at Lucy. "Are we going to keep hiding here?" "Of course not. If we keep hiding here, the reinforcements from the royal army will find us sooner or later." Lucy crossed her arms and stared at Noah, a thought-provoking smile appearing on her face. "Anyway, I'm quite interested in you. So, do you want to join our guild?" "Your guild?" Noah was startled. Could it be? That's right. Lucy suddenly smiled with an extremely confident expression. It's fairy tale. Just like Aslan, magic had once been a part of people's lives in Edras, playing an indispensable role in human civilization. It was only when the magic power of Edras gradually began to dry up and the kingdom banned ordinary people from possessing magic in order to monopolize the magic power of this world that everything began to change. However, how could magic, which had once been a part of civilization, not be used just like that? Therefore, in the dark of this world, many people were still smuggling magic and magic power for those who were unwilling to submit to the kingdom to use. Of course, since it was smuggling, it was something that could not be exposed. The long whip that seemed to be made of fluorescent light that Lucy held was actually Edras's magic. Since she held magic, it proved that Lucy had done many sneaky things in the dark. In view of this, even though the entire town was patrolled by the royal army, Lucy continued to lead Noah to and fro in the small alleys of the town. Unbeknownst to them, they had actually circled to the outskirts of the town. If this is the case, we are safe for the time being. Lucy clapped her hands, as if she was a big sister who was greeting her underlings, and hooked her finger at Noah leisurely. "Come with me, I'll bring you to our guild. Of course, I also have some things to ask you." Saying this, Lucy did not seem to be worried that Noah would not follow her at all as she walked ahead, minding her own business. Seeing this, Noah shrugged his shoulders. He did not refuse and directly followed him. After all, Noah also had many things to ask Lucy. "Oh right, I forgot to introduce myself," Lucy suddenly said. "My name is Lucy. I think you've already guessed it. I'm the magic wizard of fairy tale." I know. Noah had indeed guessed that Lucy was the sorcerer of fairy tale in this world long ago, and answered without any surprise. "You can just call me Noah." "Noah, is it?" Lucy glanced sideways at the guild crest on the back of Noah's hand. Then, it's about time you tell me where you came from, right? What? Noah said with a half-smile. Are you still doubting my words? Do you even need to say that? Lucy was speechless. I am the sorcerer of fairy tale, but I have never seen you in fairy tale. You actually said that you are the sorcerer of fairy tale. Do you think I will believe you? Is that so? Noah murmured. So I really don't exist in this world's fairy tale. Noah had already guessed this result. Although Edras was Aslan's parallel world, it didn't mean that there would be two people who looked exactly the same in two parallel worlds. Sometimes, in another parallel world, there would be people who did not exist in another parallel world. Naturally, it was also possible that there would not be people who existed in another parallel world. Therefore, in this world, it was not impossible that Noah did not exist. Of course, this was not what made Noah certain that he did not exist in this world. Although it wasn't directly stated, from Gaia and Alea's attitude and some clues in the unseen world, Noah knew that he wasn't a person of this world, including Aslan and Edras. In other words, in Aslan Terry, Noah was a character who should not have existed. In this way, in Edras, Noah would naturally not exist. Thinking of this, Noah sighed. It's a little troublesome to explain now, let's wait until we reach the guild. Lucy immediately looked at Noah suspiciously, but did not continue to ask. She brought Noah and plunged into a forest in the distance. It took them nearly 2 hours to walk this distance. It was not until 2 hours later that Noah saw it. In the corner of the forest, in front of him, a very strange building came into view. Chapter 1088. In front of Noah was a very peculiar building. The building itself seemed to be constructed by a kind of vine-like plant. Except for some parts, the rest of the building was green. However, even though it was such a peculiar building, the door was still an ordinary door. Next to the door, there was a signboard with the emblem of the Fairy Tale Guild as its design. In the middle of the building, there was a flag with the same fairy tale emblem as the emblem. As for the scale, it was not like Aslan's fairy tale building, which was like a castle. Instead, it was like an ordinary house with nothing out of the ordinary. Under such circumstances, Lucy directly stepped forward and boldly pushed the door open. I'm back. With this shout, the eyes of the entire fairy tale were focused on her. Noah, who was standing behind Lucy, clearly saw it. The interior of the building also presented the scene of an ordinary bar. However, in the bar, there were many people. To Noah, each and every one of them was quite familiar in terms of appearance. These people are all sorcerers from Aslan's fairy tale, right? Just as Noah had such a thought in his mind, the following development made Noah dumbfounded. Too slow. Following this furious roar, a petite fist suddenly appeared in front of Lucy. Without any hesitation, it carried a considerable amount of strength as it directly blasted towards Lucy's face. Paw! In response, Lucy only raised one hand. With a clear sound, she suddenly caught the fist that was blasted towards her with her palm. The smile on her face gradually darkened as she glared in front of her. What are you doing? Bastard! The one who punched Lucy was a petite girl. In Noah's memory, her favorite thing to do was to hold a book and wear a pair of glasses on her face. She was like an outstanding intellectual, a girl who loved learning. At this moment, in Noah's memory, this girl who loved to pester Noah when he was free, asking Noah to teach her all kinds of languages and characters. She even treated Noah as a kindred spirit and would enthusiastically discuss some problems in books with Noah from time to time. With an unfriendly expression, she also glared angrily at Lucy. Didn't I tell you that the matter of repairing the teleportation magic machine is very urgent? If we don't quickly gather the materials, when the fairy hunt comes, we won't be able to escape this time. That's why I told you to quickly buy the materials back. That's why. Lucy was so angry that the word, well, was printed on her forehead. Didn't I come back now? So. Lily gritted her teeth as she shouted. Didn't I say that it's too slow? In this situation where neither of them was willing to give way to the other, Lucy and Lebby actually clasped their hands together and pressed their foreheads against each other as if they were trying to push each other down. Seeing Lucy and Lily like this, the people in the guild began to discuss as if they were used to it. Again. Naz, who was dressed like a racer, shrunk his neck and said timidly. Big Sister Lucy and Big Sister Lily are so scary, quarreling again. Gray, who was wrapped in a down jacket and dressed like a snowball, was shivering as if he was afraid of the cold, couldn't stand it any longer and said. Since you know that time is of the essence, then hurry up and repair the magic machine. Can you stop quarreling? Really? Kana, who wore a hat on her head and looked like a virtuous young lady, cupped her cheek and spoke with a gentle tone. But this is also a sign that Lucy and Lily have a good relationship, isn't it? Is that really the case? Elfman, who had a hairstyle that made him look like an honest man, stole a glance at Lucy and Lebby who were wrestling. Then, like Naz, he shrunk his head. Actually, I feel the same as Naz. I think that Lucy and Lily are really scary. After hearing the words of the cowardly Naz, the cold Gray, the gentle Kana, and the honest Elfman, a young girl in her 20s sighed. She had one hand on her waist as she combed her long, sky-blue hair that reached her waist. It doesn't matter. Can any of you go and stop them? Unfortunately, this sentence made everyone except Kana shiver down their spines. They shook their heads with all their might. Elfman's eyes even started to water up. He looked pitiful as if he was about to cry at any moment. It was obvious that Naz, Gray, and Elfman were extremely afraid of Lucy and Lily. The corner of Noah's eyes kept twitching as he witnessed this scene from outside the door of Fairy Tale. Ever since he saw Lucy, Noah felt that the personalities of his fairy tale companions in this world should be different from the ones he knew. But isn't this difference a little too thorough? That playful and cute Lily is so strong and fierce here. That Naz who was clamoring for a duel every day is so timid and cowardly here. That Gray who took off his clothes instinctively doesn't feel hot wearing so much here. That Kana who drank wine like drinking water is so virtuous and gentle here. This isn't just a little different, it's a complete reversal, isn't it? What made Noah even more confused was the following conversation between Kana and the mature girl with sky-blue waist-length hair. That's true, but aren't you going to stop them? Kana looked at the other party. Wendy. The girl who was called Wendy by Kana was definitely not young. The girl in her prime was distressed for a moment and could only nod helplessly. There's really no other way. Hearing this, Noah's mouth twitched. Wendy. She's Wendy. The Wendy who was always around him calling him brother. Fortunately, in the next second, a voice that was gentler and sweeter than Kana's finally shook Noah out of his confusion. That's enough, Lucy, Lebby, stop fighting. A girl with snow-white and beautiful waist-length hair wearing a princess dress came from the bar counter to Lucy and Lily. With gentle movements, she separated the two of them, with a sincere and gentle smile on her face. The most important thing now is to fix the teleportation magic machine. We don't know when the royal army will find us again, so I'm counting on you. It was believed that no matter how violent a person was, in front of such a gentle and beautiful person, they would not be able to get angry. Including Lucy and Lily. At that moment, Lucy and Lily could only reluctantly separate. Since Mira has already said so, that was Mira Jenny. She was a girl as gentle and beautiful as the Mira Jenny that Noah knew. Phew, finally seeing someone who could make him feel familiar and get rid of the extreme discomfort, Noah finally let out a sigh of relief. And this sigh of relief finally allowed the magic shooters in Fairy Tale to discover Noah's existence. You. Mira tilted her head and spoke in a seemingly innocent manner. Who are you? Myra's performance seemed innocent, but Noah was sharp enough to notice a trace of vigilance in her eyes. No. It was not just Mira. Apart from Lucy, including Lily, Kana, and Wendy, all the magic shooters in Fairy Tale had vigilant looks in their eyes. Naz and Elfman even hid behind the table with tears in their eyes, looking as though they were shivering. Noah really did not expect the people in Fairy Tale to behave like this and was stunned for a moment. To Noah, his companions in the guild were his closest family. Now, those familiar faces were showing such vigilance towards him, how could Noah not be stunned? In response, Lucy only snorted coldly and said such a sentence. Can't help it, who asked us to be the Dark Guild? Chapter 1089. In Edras, although the way magic was used and existed was different from that of Aslan, since magic existed, then there were also sorcerers who could use magic. And since there were sorcerers, then there was also the existence of the Magic Guide Guild. However, ever since the magic of Edras began to dry up and the kingdom began to monopolize magic, the Magic Guide Guild, which gathered sorcerers who could use magic, was out of luck. The kingdom strictly forbade anyone from privately possessing magic, and in order to monopolize magic, forced the disbandment of the Magic Guide Guild in the world in an attempt to make all sorcerers who could use magic disappear. In the beginning, this kind of tyrannical behavior naturally attracted the resistance of many Magic Guide Guild members. However, the kingdom was an existence that ruled this world. Moreover, it was an existence that could unreasonably monopolize magic and magic. The Magic Guide Guild that obediently disbanded was one thing, but the Magic Guide Guild members that intended to resist were annihilated one by one. Even their members could not escape this calamity. Some died, some were injured, and some were even publicly executed by the kingdom. Their fates were too horrible to bear. Now, the only remaining Magic Guide Guild that still existed was Fairy Tale. Of course, Fairy Tale, who resisted the kingdom, became a dark guild that could only live in the darkness. The kingdom's army also tried every possible means to annihilate us. In front of everyone present, Lucy explained to Noah without the slightest hesitation. Under these circumstances, we have to fight with our lives on the line, not to mention strange and suspicious people coming to find us. The reason Noah had attracted the attention of the kingdom's army in the town was because Fairy Tale was the only remaining Magic Guide Guild. Naturally, the sorcerers of Fairy Tale who disobeyed the kingdom's orders and continued to use magic became wanted by the kingdom one by one, causing Fairy Tale to become a dark guild. A dark guild. Noah couldn't help but have a complicated and bitter expression. Who would have thought that Fairy Tale would actually become a dark guild one day? Noah's complicated and bitter expression caused the sorcerers in Fairy Tale to have the same feelings, but they still looked at Noah with suspicion and vigilance. Hey, idiot Lucy, did you bring this person back? Levi said to Lucy, extremely displeased. You brought a stranger into our guild just like that, aren't you afraid that he'll report us to the kingdom's army? That's true, but this person seems a little interesting. Lucy didn't disagree with Levi on this matter, and pointed at the guild crest on the back of Noah's hand as she spoke meaningfully. Look, he has our guild's emblem on him, and he even claimed to be our guild sorcerer. But after I saved this fellow from the hands of the royal army, I realized that we didn't know him at all. Don't you think that's interesting? Interesting. Wendy was taken aback and asked with uncertainty. You brought him back because he's interesting? You could say that for now. Lucy stepped forward and came directly in front of the members of Fairy Tale. She then turned around and faced Noah, an unfathomable smile on her face. Undoubtedly, he's someone we don't know, but he claims to be a sorcerer from Fairy Tale. Undoubtedly, facts have proven that this person is a fake, but I have no choice but to believe his words, so I brought him back. In response to Lucy's words, the Fairy Tale sorcerers of Edras were baffled. However, there was one thing that everyone understood. Lucy had chosen to believe in Noah. Otherwise, Lucy definitely wouldn't have taken the risk of being discovered by Fairy Tale to bring Noah back. Understanding this, Noah looked at Lucy speechlessly. Under Noah's gaze, Lucy grinned. I've already done this much, so it's about time you say something that won't betray my trust in you, right? Hearing this, Noah could only smile bitterly. Unlike the world of Aslan Try, the Lucy in the world of Edras was actually so decisive and independent. However, it was certain that no matter which world it was, Noah couldn't do anything about Fairy Tale. That was right. 15 minutes later, the entire interior of Fairy Tale was silent. All of the Fairy Tale sorcerers of Edras turned their gazes towards Noah, who was sitting in one of the seats. Their eyes were filled with disbelief, bewilderment, and more than anything else, suspicion. That is to say, you are not from this world, but the Fairy Tale from another world called Aslan, which is opposite to this world, right? Not to mention the others, even Lucy, who had chosen to believe in Noah, looked at Noah with suspicion and threw out such a sentence. Do you have any proof that what you just said is true? So it's really like this. Noah seemed to have expected this to happen. He sighed and held his forehead. Then, he finally threw caution to the wind. Mira over there. Mira didn't seem to have expected Noah to suddenly call out to her. She looked around blankly and pointed to herself. Are you calling me? That's right. Noah asked such a question that he already knew the answer to. You don't know me, right? Why yes. Mira replied in confusion. I really don't know you. Are you trying to say that you don't know Mira here, but you know Mira in the other world? So, you can reveal some of Mira's secrets to prove that you're from the other world. Levi looked at Noah with disdain. Undoubtedly, you just said that although the people in this world are similar to the people in the other world, their personalities and experiences are different. That's true. Noah shrugged. But, at least in my opinion, the Mira here should have the same physical characteristics as the Mira I know, right? Physical characteristics. Everyone was stunned. Seeing this, Noah silently apologized to Mira in his heart and then pointed his finger at her. You have a mole an inch below your belly button. Mira's face froze. There's more. Noah said firmly. You also have a mole on your butt. Mira's mouth opened slowly. Anne. Noah smiled wickedly. Your measurements are 86-57-84. Mira's delicate face immediately flushed red. Seeing that Noah was about to say something, the red-faced Mira rushed forward and covered Noah's mouth. Don't say any more. Seeing Mira's reaction, how could everyone not understand that Noah had hit the nail on the head? You. Lucy's mouth twitched. Why do you know so much about Mira's physical characteristics? At this moment, everyone present looked as if they were looking at a criminal suspect. The eyes of the female camp's companions turned cold, while the eyes of the male camp's companions turned into envy and jealousy. What are you thinking? Noah quickly asked. In the other world, Mira is my fiancée. That's why I know all this. Fiancé. Everyone exclaimed in shock. Even Mira looked at Noah in a daze. After a while, she spoke in surprise. In the other world, I'm your fiancé. Noah couldn't help but smile. It's the real deal. Perhaps Mira saw something in Noah's eyes and expression, but she fell silent. Noah heaved a sigh of relief. Fortunately, the two Miris had the same physical characteristics. If they were the same as Wendy, the difference would be huge. Chapter 1090. After a short conversation, the members of Fairy Tale did not fully believe Noah's words, but at the very least, they were half convinced. If it had been any other modern world, it would not have been so easy to believe that he came from another world. However, the world of fairy tale was a world where magic prevailed. In a situation where magic itself represented inconceivable phenomena, the people of this world who fully understood magic would naturally not find it that hard to accept the existence of another world. After explaining his purpose for coming to this world to the people of fairy tale, Noah finally got to the point. So, I want to go to the royal capital. Can you tell me how to get there? That one sentence caused everyone to fall silent. After a long time, Lucy sighed and said so. Even though you're not one of us, you're still another member of fairy tale. Logically speaking, it wouldn't matter if we helped you with such a small favor, but we still have to advise you to give up. Lucy's words caused the silent atmosphere to become oppressive. On the other hand, Noah himself looked at Lucy without any surprise. Because of the kingdom. In this world, the entire world of Edris was ruled by a single kingdom. The kingdom had the ability to rule the entire world and had the ability to send troops to guard every city and town to prevent the private use of magic. It was easy to imagine the extent of its influence and strength. To put it bluntly, going against a kingdom like this was no different than going against the entire world. It was obvious how small the chances of success were. Not to mention, your goal is not only the kingdom, but also the kingdom of the surpassers. Lucy showed a fearful expression for the first time. That is the race of angels ruled by God. They control the existence of all humans. If you do this, there is no doubt that you are going against both God and humans. Moreover, in the kingdom's army, apart from normal soldiers, there are also magical forces. Levi also showed a fearful expression. Right now, the magic of the entire world is monopolized by the kingdom. The magical forces of the kingdom are equipped with magic. Even if you can use magic, you have no chance of winning against such a large number of magical forces. Although the people around them did not say anything, their expressions were the same as Lucy and Levi. They did not have high hopes for Noah. That was only natural. On one side, there was a person. On the other side, there was a kingdom that had the ability to rule the entire world and a race that had the ability to control humans. No matter who it was, they did not think that the former had a chance of winning. In response, Noah said indifferently, "Don't worry. You just need to tell me how to get to the royal capital. I will think of a way to solve the rest." Seeing that Noah didn't have any intention of giving up, the entire fairy tale sorcerer couldn't help but be startled. "You should just give up." Mira couldn't help but say. "Don't you have an engagement with my other self? If something happens to you, she will be sad." "No, you are wrong." Noah looked straight at Mira and said. "Because I am here to protect my companions and the guild. Therefore, Mira will only be happy, not sad." Mira opened her mouth, but she was speechless. Just as the atmosphere became more and more oppressive, Noah, with his outstanding sensing ability, suddenly felt a ferocious aura coming towards the entire fairy tale like a meteorite. At that moment, Noah's gaze turned cold and he spoke without hesitation. "Be careful." Before he could finish his words, an indescribable impact acted on the entire fairy tale. Dong! Accompanied by a rumbling sound, the entire fairy tale shook violently as if it had been struck by something ferocious. Woo 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 woo. Caught off guard, almost no one reacted in time, causing the entire fairy tale to tremble up and down like an earthquake, causing many people to fall to the ground and cry out in alarm. Woo woo. In the next second, a low growl sounded from outside the fairy tale. It was not the cry of a human. It was the cry of a magical beast. Hearing this cry, the people present seemed to know something and their expressions changed abruptly. Not good. It's the royal army. No. It should be called the fairy hunt. The fairy hunt is here. The entire fairy tale immediately panicked. Even Lucy, Ruby, Wendy, Mira, and the others turned pale. Stupid Lebby! Lucy yelled out. Teleport! Quickly teleport! No! I can't! Ruby's face was ashen. Because you idiots suddenly brought someone from another world, I haven't even repaired the magic machine and can't activate the teleportation array to escape. At this moment, even the faces of the people around them turned pale, and some of their eyes even faintly revealed some despair. Noah was the only one who stabilized his body with one knee on the ground. He resisted the shaking of the building and looked at Mira. What's that fairy hunt? Ever since Fairy Tale became a dark guild, there's one person who's been in charge of attacking our guild. Mira bit her lip. That person is the fairy hunt. Because he had always been targeting Fairy Tale, that person was given a nickname. The Fairy Hunt. In this world, Fairy Tale was the enemy that she was most afraid of and hated the most. Boom! Not long after, the second wave of attacks came, causing the whole of Fairy Tale to shake even more violently, and even the walls began to crack. No! Lucy gritted her teeth and took out the handle of the long whip from her waist. If this continues, we will all be annihilated. Lucy! Wendy said in surprise. You! Don't tell me you want to go out and fight. If we don't fight, we will die. Lucy said with a face full of determination. If we must die, then of course I will fight to the end. The entire magic shooters of Fairy Tale were silent for a moment, and then each and every one of them showed a determined expression. Seeing this, Noah smiled. Sure enough, no matter which world it is, a fairy tale will always be a fairy tale. Noah slowly raised his head and looked outside the fairy tale. His eyes gradually glowed with a bright light. Although it's not my fairy tale, it's not someone else's turn to destroy it just like that. After saying this, Noah's whole body shot out like a bullet, and directly swept out of the door of Fairy Tale. Behind him, the exclamations of the magic shooters rang incessantly. However, Noah had already stopped on the ground outside, and looked at the sky. There was a huge black shadow suspended high in the sky, and with a hover, it was like a huge meteorite, directly falling from the sky, and directly attacking Fairy Tale. Buzz! However, at this moment, a huge golden ripple suddenly fluctuated, and covered the entire top of Fairy Tale. In the next moment, a huge shield that was as thick as a city wall and inlaid with flower petals emerged from the golden ripples. It shielded the entire Fairy Tale behind it, protecting it within. Chapter 1091. Woo Woo. The huge shadow did not seem to have expected that a huge shield would suddenly appear in front of it. It was unable to stop in time, and with a roar, it directly hit the huge shield that was like a city wall. Dong! The shocking sound of the collision was heard, and it stirred up a circle of impact like a gale. However, the huge shield was still intact. On the contrary, the huge black shadow seemed to have been repelled and retreated at a speed faster than the speed at which it had charged over. It was only then that Noah saw the true face of the huge shadow. It was a huge magical beast that looked somewhat similar to a dragon, but it was quite ferocious. And on the back of the magical beast, there was a person riding on it. A young girl with long, flowing crimson hair was holding a spearhead that looked like the claws of a ferocious beast, and the whole body of the spear had a metallic luster. Looking at the young girl, Noah's pupils could not help but shrink. Woo woo. The next moment, the huge magical beast that was forced to retreat let out an angry roar, and with a flap of its wings, it charged towards Noah's direction in the most violent manner. Shio! The huge magical beast that fell from the sky had completely turned into a black shadow under the extreme speed, and with a sharp sound of breaking through the air, it fiercely charged down. Looking at the momentum, if he was hit, there would at least be a big hole in the ground, right? However, in the face of the huge magical beast that was charging towards him, Noah's eyes flashed with a fierce light. He did not retreat, and with a bang, his whole body shot towards the sky, fearlessly welcoming the terrifying magical beast. "Be careful!" The group of magic shooters who had rushed out of the fairy tale cried out in surprise. However, in the next moment, the group of magic shooters from fairy tale were completely shocked. Bang! They could only see a heavy muffled sound exploding in midair. That was the sound of Noah, who fearlessly welcomed the incoming magical beast, turning around and suddenly kicking the huge magical beast's head heavily. This attack actually sent the huge magical beast flying. It turned into an arrow that left the bowstring and shot down from the sky. With a loud bang, it smashed into the ground, stirring up a thick layer of gravel and sand that covered its entire body. It was only for a moment. It was only one blow. The huge magical beast that was at least 100 times bigger than Noah was simply like a large piece of trash. It was kicked away by Noah and smashed onto the ground. It was estimated that if it did not die, it would not be able to stand up for a while. Faced with this, Noah's expression did not change at all. Instead, he suddenly raised his head and clenched his fist. Amidst the whistling sound of the wind, he threw out a punch. Chee! Almost at the same time, a figure suddenly flashed in front of Noah. The spearhead in his hand was like the sharp claws of a ferocious beast, and with a shake, it turned into a black ray that pierced through the air, and directly pierced towards Noah's direction. Clang! When the fist and the spear collided, it actually gave rise to a sound of metal clashing, setting off a strong shockwave that shook the two figures in the air away. Following gravity, they steadily landed on the ground on both sides of the ground in front of the huge magic beast that was stirred up by the huge magic beast, facing each other from a distance. From the moment Noah rushed out of fairy tale, blocked the huge magical beast's attack, kicked the huge magical beast away, and exchanged blows with the person riding the huge magical beast, the whole process did not even take 30 seconds. However, in this short period of less than 30 seconds, the group of magic shooters who had originally planned to risk their lives for fairy tale were all speechless as they watched the scene in front of them, and fell into an indescribable silence. Noah didn't even look at the group of magic shooters from the fairy tale. Instead, he stared straight at the crimson figure opposite him. After a while, he muttered helplessly and unhappily, "You're right, fairy tale. You're right. So that's how it is. Is this the role you play in Idris?" This kind of muttering was not heard by the beautiful crimson-haired girl. However, even if she heard it, the other party would probably not pay much attention to it, right? Because the positions of the two had already determined many things. This is really surprising. Saying this, the crimson-haired girl cast an ice-cold gaze towards Noah. There was no emotion in it. Fairy tale, who used to only know how to run away, actually chose to fight today. Pretty gutsy, isn't it? Gutsy? Noah said coldly. Only the weak would need gutsy to challenge the strong, right? Oh. The crimson-haired girl smiled, but that smile of hers was incredibly cold. In other words, you think you are stronger than me. Whether I am strong or not is not something that can be proven with words. Noah slowly extended his hand, and with a flip of his hand, a small silver sword appeared in his hand and pointed it towards the girl. Prove it with your strength. Well said. The crimson-haired girl raised the pike in her hand and slowly arched her body like a beast preparing to pounce on its prey. A murderous glint appeared in her eyes. Let me see what you can prove to me, the leader of the 2nd Magical Strike Legion, Alusha Nadewoka, with that toy in your hand. After those words, the crimson-haired girl, Alusha, clenched her fist. In her hand, the pike with the tip of a ferocious beast's claw glowed with a cold light. Bang! As if something had exploded, Alusha stomped on the ground and turned into a black shadow as she charged towards Noah. In her hand, the pike glowed with a cold light. Wherever it passed, even space itself seemed to glow with a cold light. Whoosh! In an instant, the small silver sword in Noah's hand glowed with a blinding white light that dyed the surrounding space a beautiful white. Following that, particles of light began to elongate. In the end, the silver holy sword that glowed with a beautiful silver light appeared in Noah's hand. The bright light it gave off caused the fairy tale's magi to close their eyes slightly. Clink! In the next moment, the silver holy sword and the pitch-black pike collided with each other. The sound of metal clashing was mixed with some sparks that burst out in space. The result of such a head-on collision was naturally that Noah, who had a LV, for ability value, remained unmoved. On the other hand, Alusha of Edras felt a huge force reverberate back, causing her to take a few steps back. However, Alusha, whose body was slightly shaken and she took half a step back, had an even colder expression on her face. She immediately rushed forward again, the pike in her hand glowing with a cold light. Like a venomous snake hidden in the shadows, she mercilessly bit towards Noah's direction. Looking at the pike that repeatedly pierced towards him and turned into a rain of pike lights, Noah's eyes flickered. Alusha was Noah's childhood sweetheart. The two grew up together. They ate together. They trained together. They worked together. They even bathed together. When it came to relationships, Noah and Alusha were well known in the entire fairy tale. Although the Alusha in front of him was not the Alusha Noah knew, Noah's heart gradually turned cold when he saw Alusha looking at him with a cold gaze as if she was looking at a dead person. At that moment, Noah's arm trembled slightly, but he did not retreat in the slightest. He directly brandished his sword and faced Alusha. In the arena, the brilliant white light and the cold black light each occupied half of the space. Clang 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 clang. The silver-colored sacred sword flashed past in perfect arcs as it repeatedly collided with the long spear that stirred up waves of cold glints. Waves of sparks were set off as clear and crisp sounds of collision resounded. This caused the vigorous forces to collide in the arena. Waves of shockwaves erupted as they transformed into ripples that continuously spread out. Chapter 1092. Clang 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 clang. Sword light and spear light crisscrossed. Like a beautiful crescent moon, the scars of the holy sword repeatedly danced in the air. Like a cold viper, the light of the iron spear repeatedly flashed in the air. Sword and spear unceasingly collided in this way. Every time they intersected, a wave of sparks would be created, arousing the sound of swords and halberds, making the most intense battle look like a dance, extremely pleasing to the eye. No. Accurately speaking, there was only one person in the middle of the dance. Clang 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 clang. He didn't rely on his outstanding physical ability, nor did he use any complicated stratagem. The elf user with the silver holy sword had his eyes closed, as if he couldn't see anything. It was as if he was facing off against an invisible opponent. His entire body seemed to be dancing, taking advantage of the strong wind created by the weapons clashing against each other, dancing gracefully. Every time he danced, that otherworldly figure would create a beautiful slash that tugged at everyone's heartstrings. Every time he waved, that glittering silver holy sword would create a dazzling trajectory, repeatedly colliding with the iron spear that was thrusting violently, creating a crisp sound of collision. If it was said that Alusha, holding the iron spear, mercilessly thrusting at Noah, was a bee, then Noah, holding the holy sword, using the beautiful sword light to deflect the incoming spear, was a butterfly. Even if he didn't have sufficient killing power like a bee, the dancing butterfly could still calmly flutter in the face of danger, blooming with the radiance of life. And following its master's kind and pleasing sword strike, that glittering silver holy sword's radiance became even more dazzling, causing the following slashes to become faster, fiercer, and more turbulent. That was also natural. Originally, the sword dance of the elf envoy existed to stimulate the strength of the contracted elf. Under that pleasing sword dance, the highest grade elf equipment named Demon Slayer gradually began to display its strength, causing the aggressive Alusha to be unable to resist and fall back, falling into a disadvantageous position. This made Alusha's ice-cold face flash with a trace of anger, holding the pitch-black iron spear in her hand, directly aiming at Noah's chest. Clang! Of course, such an obvious attack would not be able to do anything. It was directly deflected by the beautiful sword light that came head-on. This time, Alusha finally couldn't help but be repelled by the shockwave, involuntarily retreated several steps, and actually began to gasp for breath. Noah, as if he didn't see anything, still closed his eyes still, holding the silver holy sword, facing Alusha. Looking at Noah, who appeared to be extremely skillful, Alusha took a deep breath, and coldly said, "You do have some ability, no wonder your tone is so arrogant." However, this sentence was only exchanged with Noah's indifferent words. "Is that so? But I haven't shown my true ability yet." Alusha's eyes flashed with a trace of sharpness, and coldly laughed, no longer saying anything. The iron spear in her hand suddenly vibrated, and a burst of light suddenly burst out. Although his eyes were closed, his outstanding perception allowed Noah to feel a surge of magic from Alusha's iron spear. Without a doubt, Alusha was preparing to use Edra's magic. Following the burst of light on Alusha's iron spear, the pitch-black iron spear suddenly changed shape. At the same time, a scorching hot wind began to swirl around the completely deformed iron spear, dyeing the spearhead a fiery red like a soldering iron. "I'd like to see if you really have such ability." Leaving such a sentence, Alusha held up the fiery red spear, stamped her feet on the ground, and her body turned into a crimson shadow, shooting out like a ghost. As Alusha's figure shot out, an astonishingly high temperature rapidly condensed on the fiery red spear in her hand. In the end, it faintly formed a circle of flames condensed from demonic power. Feeling that astonishing heat, Noah didn't have the slightest doubt. If he was hit by Alusha's next attack, even with the LV, for durability bonus, his skin would still be burned black, right? However, facing the hot wind from Alusha's fiery red spear that had already pounced on Noah's face, Noah opened his eyes. His pitch-black eyes flashed, and the arm that was tightly holding the holy sword trembled slightly. A rich divine aura surged out from his arm, instilling into it, causing the elven magic equipment named Demon Slayer to blossom with a dazzling light. "I'll let you experience the true power of my 10 Commandments spear." A cold shout came from Alusha's mouth as she rushed over. Bursting spear. In the next second, the spear that was covered by the dense fiery red-hot wind, as if it had suddenly pierced through the void, bringing along an astonishing heat as it violently swept out. As the fiery red spear swept out, one could only see that the space around the spear had become slightly distorted. The blazing heat even roasted the ground until it was like the dead wood in the desert, completely charred black. The scorching flames illuminated Noah's expressionless face. Under the gaze of everyone present, Noah only slowly raised the Demon Slayer that was shining with boundless radiance. Just like before, he swung it out to meet the terrifying spear with neither light nor heavy force. Stupid. Alusha's eyes finally flashed with killing intent, but the strength in her hand didn't decrease, but instead increased. Immediately, the shockingly powerful spear streaked through the air and collided head-on with the ordinary sword that was neither light nor heavy. Rumble. Just at the moment when the silver holy sword and the fiery red spear came into contact, a dull explosion instantly sounded. The fiery red-hot wind that had gathered at the tip of Alusha's spear actually exploded, causing an astonishing explosion from the point of contact. It was like a ripple that spread in all directions, covering Noah's body within it. However, before Alusha could reveal a victorious smile, the explosion that covered Noah suddenly stagnated. Suddenly, like a whirlpool, it condensed in one direction. In the end, the astonishing burst of flames wrapped around a saint sword that was sparkling with silver light. Like a flaming tornado, a terrifying flame rose up. Wah! Alusha's face changed drastically. Then, a voice that seemed to be far away reverberated from the thick flames. Absolute sword technique. Form 4 flame slash. The holy sword that carried the terrifying flaming tornado suddenly exploded, like a meteor falling from the sky. Under the gaze of Alusha's shrunken pupils, it heavily slashed down. Dong! This time, it was the shining silver holy sword's turn to explode with terrifying flames when it landed on Alusha's body. It set off an astonishing explosion, covering Alusha's entire body within, shaking her in all directions. Not long after, in the scorching flames, Alusha, whose entire body was emitting light smoke, was like a kite with a broken string. Her body flew out from the flames and landed heavily on the ground. After rolling a few times, she finally stopped and laid there, no longer moving. The whole place was dead silent. Witnessing the moment when Alusha was defeated with their own eyes, the entire fairy tale was stunned on the spot, unable to react. "It's a lie, right?" Lucy muttered. "That guy defeated the fairy hunter." Why was Alusha called the fairy hunter? It was because Alusha had always been chasing after fairy tale. Until now, who knows how many fairy tale magic shooters she had annihilated. To fairy tale, Alusha was like a natural enemy. Sooner or later they would all obediently become prey in her hands. Now, this natural enemy of fairy tale was suddenly defeated, to the extent that everyone in fairy tale was stunned on the spot. Chapter 1093. Whoosh! A whistling gale suddenly blew up, blowing away the explosive flames and sand that had filled the empty space in front of the fairy tale, causing the ground that was slightly charred and more or less cracked to be clearly displayed in front of everyone. In the field, Noah looked at Alusha, who was sprawled on the ground, not moving at all. He held the demon slayer tightly and felt the dense divine energy flowing within it as he muttered to himself. "Aster, are you okay?" Just as he finished speaking, Aster's voice sounded in Noah's mind. "It's okay, Master. At the last moment, I restrained my power. That human shouldn't have died immediately." Hearing this, Noah nodded silently. The sorcerers of Edras weren't like the sorcerers of Aslan, who could store mana within their bodies and use their own power to cast spells. In Edras, the so-called magic was actually just the power of magical weapons and magical items. Noah was well aware of this. Originally, he thought that there would be a difference in strength between Azran's and Edras's sorcerers, even if they were on the same level. However, Alusha of Edras, the leader of the second magical battle unit, who was known as the Fairy Huntress, was much more outstanding than most of the sorcerers of Aslan. At least, in Noah's opinion, Alusha of Edras and Alusha of Aslan were evenly matched. To be able to reach such a level with just magical weapons, Alusha of Edras's abilities could be seen clearly. After all, even Alusha of Aslan's reload spell was only a spell used to quickly replace and store magical weapons. In other words, Alusha of Aslan's strength was largely due to the power of magical weapons. Of course, just by relying on the power of magical weapons, Alusha of Aslan would never be able to become an S-rank sorcerer of the fairy tale. In fact, her strength had almost reached the level required to become one of the 10 great Saint Magi. To be able to use magical weapons to perfection and display 200% of their power, that was the true strength of Aslan's Alusha. Otherwise, Alusha wouldn't need to train her sword skills and other battle techniques so hard. And Alusha of Edras didn't just rely on the power of magical weapons. This girl was the same as the Alusha of Noah's acquaintance. She was the kind of person who would painstakingly train her own skills and display the full power of magical weapons. In Edras, there shouldn't be many who could be a match for Alusha, right? If she hadn't met Noah, who was even more unruly than her, glancing at Alusha who was still lying on the ground, Noah turned around. Just as he was about to leave, a voice full of pain suddenly rang out. Wait! Wait! Noah's footsteps paused. He turned his head and looked in the direction of Elusha once again. There, Elusha was tightly holding the weapon known as the Spear of the 10 Commandments. She planted the spear on the ground and stood up with difficulty. A pair of cold eyes stared unwaveringly at Noah. I haven't lost yet. This sentence caused the sorcerers of the fairy tale to look at Elusha with pity. However, at this moment, Elusha didn't have the sorcerers of the fairy tale in her eyes. She only had Noah in her eyes. My Spear of the 10 Commandments has 10 forms, and each form has a different ability. You've only seen 2 of them. There are still 8 forms left. Elusha used both hands to hold the spear tightly. She supported her swaying body, which was covered in burn marks, and stood up with difficulty. So, I haven't lost yet. Hearing this, the sorcerers of the fairy tale were shocked. Elusha's Spear of the 10 Commandments has 10 forms. And each form has a different ability. Doesn't that mean that Elusha can use the equivalent of 10 types of magic? However, after interacting with Elusha for so long, the members of the fairy tale have never seen the other forms of the Spear of the 10 Commandments. Could it be that Elusha has never used her full strength when hunting the sorcerers of the fairy tale? Thinking of this, the sorcerers of the fairy tale felt a chill in their hearts. Once again, the fear of the fairy hunt surged up. On the contrary, after hearing Elusha's words, Noah did not reply. He only looked at Elusha, who was struggling to support her swaying body and staring at him with a pair of ice-cold eyes. After a long while, he said this. You've already lost. After saying this, Noah no longer paid attention to Elusha. The demon slayer, in his hand, slowly turned into a burst of light particles and turned back into a palm-sized silver dagger. Noah put it back on his waist and turned around, walking towards the direction of the fairy tale. Elusha's delicate face was somewhat distorted. Just as she was about to recklessly move forward, in front of her, Noah's footsteps stopped and cast his gaze towards the forest at the side. A golden ripple reverberated around Noah's body and a gorgeous spear popped out. With a rise and fall, it turned into a ray of light and shot towards the direction of the forest. Pang! The powerful noble phantasm directly exploded the ground of the forest, setting off a strong gust of wind. And in that gust of wind, a figure was thrown out like a rolling gourd. It was extremely embarrassing as it rolled on the ground. After a while, it came to a stop with great difficulty. It was a tall man wearing pink armor with a hairstyle that resembled a plane. Seeing the man rolling on the ground like a rolling gourd, Elusha was startled and exclaimed in surprise. Shug boy! Elusha's address made the nearby magic shooters of the fairy tale surprised as well. Shug boy! Mira exclaimed in surprise. Isn't that the captain of the kingdom's 4th demon battle unit? The captain of the kingdom's 4th demon battle unit. Noah narrowed his eyes and looked at Shug boy. However, under Noah's gaze, the captain of the demon battle unit named Shug boy flipped over and jumped up. He took out a sword and directly stabbed it into the ground. Sword of Rose. A wave of magic suddenly rippled across the entire ground with the sword that Shug boy had stabbed into the ground as the center. The next moment, the ground suddenly rippled like soft cotton. With a swell, it was like a huge wave that surged towards Noah's direction. Oh! Noah raised his eyebrows. Is it similar to the Hitai of the Oration Cease? At the same time, another luxurious spear shot out from the golden ripples around Noah. Like a bullet fired from a barrel, it shot toward the soft earth wave that was surging over. Bang! With an explosive sound, the wave of earth that surged towards Noah's direction was directly blasted apart by the noble phantasm that had turned into a laser. It scattered like water and fell back to the ground, causing the previously undulating ground to return to its original state. However, behind the wave of earth, Shug boy and Elusha, who should have been there, had disappeared. Seeing this, the group of fairy tale magic shooters looked at each other in dismay. She escaped. Noah was the only one who wasn't surprised at all as he looked at Ilus's original position and muttered to himself once again. He muttered to himself, "I hope I won't meet you again next time." This sentence was somewhat unrealistic. After all, for the sake of fairy tale, Noah had to go to the Imperial City. At that time, as the captain of the kingdom's second demon battle unit, Elusha would definitely block in front of Noah, right? Chapter 1094. The royal capital of Edras was the most prosperous city on the continent. There was no need to explain the reason. It was simply because it was the royal capital, the home of the king of Edras. Of course, that was only one of the reasons. The reason why the royal capital of Edras was so prosperous was because the king lived there. The other reason was because of an island floating in the air above the royal capital. Extania. It was the place where the humans of Edras lived under the rule of the self-proclaimed goddess, the angel race, or surpassers. This island, which was like a shrine to Edras, floated in the air above the royal capital of Edras. That was why the royal capital of Edras had no choice but to be prosperous since it was located below the island where the goddess lived. Perhaps it was because of this that the city under Extania was chosen to be the capital of the kingdom. Apart from those two reasons, there was another reason why the royal capital had become the most prosperous city in Edras. Under the king's strict ban on the use of private magic, only the royal capital was allowed to use magic in public in the entire Edras. The reason was that the king needed the support of his people. To win the support of his people, the king of Edras allowed the citizens of the royal capital to use magic. How should one put it? The hypocritical and dictatorial side of the royal capital was on full display. At this time, in the center of the huge palace in the capital, in an extremely vast and luxurious hall, there was a white-haired and white-bearded old man sitting on the throne. He was around 70 or 80 years old, with a crown on his head and a scepter in his hand, which represented his authority, sat with his eyes closed. That was the king of Edras, Faust. Below the throne, there were two people kneeling side by side on one knee. One of them was a youth around 17 or 18 years old. The other was a burly young man in his 20s, covered in black fur and with a face like that of a leopard. However, no matter if it was a human or a cat, at this moment, they were all facing the king who was sitting with his eyes closed. They lowered their heads submissively, not even daring to breathe loudly. There was no other reason. While there didn't seem to be anything out of the ordinary, the sinister atmosphere in the hall showed that the king of Faust was enraged. Moreover, it was the kind that was filled with rage. Failed. Faust's voice was filled with suppressed rage. How many times have I failed? After saying this, Faust slowly opened his eyes and roared furiously. Undoubtedly, the anima worked well this time and should have been successfully activated. But why didn't the successful anima send Aslan's magic back? Kneeling on one knee on the ground, the man and the cat lowered their heads and closed their eyes, silently enduring the king's fury. There was no other way. From Faust's monopolization of magic, one could see how selfish this king was. If he were to bump into the enemy's muzzle at this time, even if he didn't die a horrible death, his end wouldn't be good either. Even under such circumstances, Faust was still angrily shouting. Ever since the anima was developed, the plan has been carried out for so many years, but Aslan's magic hasn't been sent back even once. If this continues, when will we be able to obtain an endless supply of magic? In response to Faust's words, the strong black cat continued to bear it without any expression. Only the young man's body trembled slightly as if he was experiencing the same thing. Ever since the anima plan was started, it had indeed never succeeded. It wasn't because there was something wrong with the anima spatial magic. Instead, in Aslan, there was always someone who forcefully shut down the anima, whenever it was activated, preventing the anima from sending Aslan's magic back to Edris. Needless to say, the reason why Edris' anima failed at the last moment was entirely because of Mr. Gang's interference. For this reason, this time, Edris didn't hesitate to use up a large amount of magic to adjust the anima power to the highest level. He originally thought that under such circumstances, no one would be able to stop the anima from activating. Now that the anima had indeed been successfully activated, Faust, who had received the news at that time, had been really excited. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for a basin of cold water to extinguish the excitement in Faust's heart. The spatial magic had indeed been activated. However, Aslan's magic hadn't been sent over. Why was this? No one knew the reason. But there was one thing that was certain. That was, this time, Edris still hadn't been able to obtain the magic from Aslan. When he thought of this, the anger in Faust's heart couldn't be suppressed. Magic. Faust's hand clenched the scepter so tightly that it made cracking sounds. He was both jealous and envious as he murmured. When will I be able to obtain an endless supply of magic like Aslan? At this moment, from Faust's eyes and face, there was only one feeling. Insatiable greed. Just like how greedy people would never be satisfied with limited money, or how greedy people would never be satisfied with a little bit of power, what the king of Edris pursued was endless magic. That was all. After a long time, Faust took a deep breath and suddenly spoke. Lily, Faust's call finally made the sturdy black cat open its eyes and raise its head. Your Majesty, I am here. I need you to answer a question honestly. Faust's eyes shone with a cruel light. As the captain of the kingdom's #1 magic army, if I let you lead the army to attack Aslan, can you bring me victory? These words caused Lily's pupils to constrict uncontrollably. Even the youth at the side trembled, as if he was extremely shocked by Faust's words. That was to be expected. For the sake of magic, this insatiable king actually wanted to attack Aslan. That was simply wishful thinking. Forgive me for being blunt, Your Majesty. Lily could only close his eyes again and speak in a low voice. Let's not talk about battle prowess. In terms of resources, if our army wants to fully display our battle prowess, we must have sufficient magic. Aslan, on the other hand, does not have to worry about magic. If we go to war, unless our battle prowess far exceeds Aslan's, we will definitely lose once our magic is exhausted. Therefore, the chances of victory are extremely low. Magic. Magic power again. Faust was furious. Why can Aslan enjoy the treatment of endless magic? Why can't we? No one could answer Faust's question. This was no longer a question that humans could answer. It was a question of the world. Aslan's magic could automatically circulate between all things. Edris' magic, on the other hand, would be exhausted sooner or later. This was the difference between the two worlds, and also the fundamental difference between the two worlds. In the face of the world's decision, the power of humans was pitifully meager. Get out! Faust roared as if he had gone mad. All of you, get out! Lily and the youth could only silently retreat. Even after they had left the royal hall, they could still hear Faust's angry roars from within the door. Phew! The youth wiped the cold sweat off his forehead, his face bitter. I can't believe you're still so calm, Lily. Aren't you usually very long-winded? Zeus. Lily glanced at the youth. I thought you'd be long-winded in front of His Majesty again. I'm not an idiot. The youth named Zeus was speechless. Long-winded in that situation. Then I'd definitely be dragged out and beheaded in public. Hearing this, Lily wanted to say something, but his eyes suddenly froze, and he looked ahead. What's wrong? Zeus looked over in confusion, and then his face froze. In the corridor ahead, two people were walking over shakily. One of them was Shugboy, whose armor had become dirty. The other was Alusha, whose entire body was covered in scorch marks. You! Seuss said in shock. You! Ignoring Seuss, Alusha went directly in front of Lily, raised her head, and looked at Lily. Her cold voice sounded. I need your help. Chapter 1095. On a wide rocky road, an Arcanatech car was speeding forward at an extremely fast speed. Even though the road was full of potholes, the Arcanatech car's speed did not slow down at all. It was like an off-road race car, madly rushing forward. Yo-ho! In the driver's seat of the Arcanatech car, Naz, who was wearing a pair of goggles and acting like a complete submissive in Fairy Tale, seemed to have been injected with some highly effective stimulant. Not only did he not have a cowardly expression, but he also turned the steering wheel very wildly. His skills were quite superb. This scene made Noah, who was sitting in the back, twitch the corner of his eyes. Originally, Noah had thought that the biggest difference between Aslan's Naz and Edra's Naz was that one was daring and the other was timid and cowardly. Now it seemed that the most fundamental difference between the Naz of the two worlds was their adaptation to transportation. No matter what kind of transportation Aslan's Naz took, he would immediately get carsick. But Edra's Naz not only did not have carsick at all, it seemed that his adaptation to transportation was frighteningly strong. At least, Noah was frightened. Are you scared? Lucy, who was sitting in the back with Noah, crossed her arms and had a thought-provoking look. Although I don't know what the Naz in Aslan's Fairy Tale is like, but here, although Naz is usually very timid and useless, once he gets in the car, his personality will completely become strong and excited. I can tell. Noah was speechless for a while. After a while, he sighed and propped his arm up. He looked at the scenery outside the window that was receding at an extremely fast speed and said casually, I can tell, actually, you didn't have to come with us. After repelling Alusa of Edras, Noah originally thought that this would more or less give some confidence to Fairy Tale, who was terrified of the fairy hunt, but Noah didn't expect that Fairy Tale would be so confident. In fact, the fact that Alusha was defeated by Noah really made the sorcerers of Fairy Tale really excited. However, after the excitement, the group of magic shooters from Fairy Tale, who had calmed down, immediately panicked like ants on a hot pan. The reason was very simple. It was because the one who defeated Alusha was always Noah, and not the sorcerers of Fairy Tale of Edras. As for Noah, he would leave sooner or later. At that time, without the protection of Noah, the Fairy Tale of Edras would face the wrath of the royal army. It was easy to imagine what would happen to the Fairy Tale of Edras. Hence, after calming down, the entire Fairy Tale immediately busied themselves, assisting Lebby, to repair the magic machine with teleportation function, and moving it to another foothold. Noah, on the other hand, did not make any comments about this. After all, not to mention Edra's Fairy Tale, even in Aslan's Fairy Tale, there were only a few people who could compete with Alusha. In the face of such a threat, it was indeed necessary to move the base. However, after Fairy Tale had repaired the magic machine and started to discuss the matter of moving the base, Noah once again made a request to go to the royal capital. This time, the sorcerers of Fairy Tale looked at each other, recalling Noah's astonishing battle prowess. In the end, they did not say anything and nodded in agreement. However, Noah did not expect that Lucy would actually stand up and suggest to lead the way for Noah. At the same time, she also caught the cowardly Naz. You just need to tell me how to get to the royal capital, don't you? Noah said as if he was talking to himself. Aren't you very afraid of the royal army? There's no need to come along, right? In this world, who isn't afraid of the royal army? Lucy also supported her hand and looked out of the window. She and Noah seemed to be back to back, and her eyes flickered slightly. If it's possible, I don't want to go to that city, that's like hell to us. If you just want to go there for a vacation, we'll definitely give you a map without a second thought. But you're not just going there for a vacation, are you? So? Noah said. What's the reason for you to come along? The one who answered Noah's question was not Lucy, but Naz. Lucy's intuition is very accurate. Holding the steering wheel, Naz, whose personality had completely become strong, grinned without turning his head. You must think that you can definitely bring us a new future, so you want to come along to witness this moment, right? A new future. Noah was silent for a moment, and then shrugged. Even if I plan to do something that may completely change the situation of this world, maybe it's not a good thing for you. Isn't it a good thing? Lucy laughed self-deprecatingly. No matter what kind of future it is there a worse situation than hiding like a rat crossing the street? Noah was speechless. Actually, everyone in the guild knows that if we keep hiding like this, sooner or later, Fairy Tale will still be destroyed like the Magic Guide Guild that was annihilated by the Royal Kingdom. Lucy said so in a rather distant voice. So, even if you don't say it on the surface, everyone must be looking forward to what you can change, right? Unfortunately, all everyone can do is look forward to it. The smile on Naz's face slowly disappeared, and turned into a serious expression. Everyone is still very afraid of the Royal Kingdom, and there's no way to take a step forward. I don't want that. Lucy said directly and cast her gaze on Noah. So, even if you can't do anything, I want to see what kind of changes you can bring to this world. From Lucy's words, Noah did hear a kind of persistence that was unwilling to give in. Presumably, Lucy has long wanted to change something through her own hands, right? It's just that she has never had such an opportunity. What about you? Noah turned his head and looked at Naz. Why are you willing to give me a ride? Me? Naz suddenly smiled. That smile was just like the Naz that Noah knew, full of arbitrary arrogance. Don't get me wrong, although I also have expectations for you, it's not as big as Lucy's. I don't want to have a direct conflict with the Royal Kingdom, and I only came here because Lucy asked me to. If it weren't for the fact that his personality had completely changed after getting in the car, Naz wouldn't have said such a sentence so naturally and matter-of-factly. Instead, he would be crying like a coward, right? Just when Noah was about to say something, a flash of light suddenly exploded in front of the magic-driven car. Boom! An astonishing explosion suddenly appeared in front of the magic-driven car, setting off a strong flame. Naz quickly manipulated the steering wheel, making the magic-driven car turn a corner fiercely. It bypassed the astonishing explosion in a thrilling manner, and drove forward while bumping. Lucy was almost overturned to the ground. She grabbed the chair in an extremely embarrassing manner. After stabilizing her body, she spoke in bewilderment. What happened? Noah also grabbed the door handle of the car tightly. Instead of answering Lucy's words, he suddenly raised his head and looked at the sky through the window. Then, his face gradually took on a fierce look. A bunch of guys who can't learn a lesson. Hearing Noah's words, Lucy also looked at the sky through the window. And the scene in front of her eyes made this girl with a strong character couldn't help but be stunned. In the sky, there were many enormous figures flapping their wings. Surprisingly, it was the huge demonic beast that Alusha rode when she attacked Fairy Tale previously. Such demonic beasts almost covered half of the sky at this time, slowly surging in the direction of the magic-driven car. Chapter 1096. Then, how many magical beasts were flying in the sky? Even though it was impossible to count them all, half of the sky was filled with gigantic black silhouettes. It wasn't hard to imagine how many magical beasts there were. Almost every single one of these demonic beasts was larger than the average building. With such a huge number of magical beasts, if a war were to break out, they would be able to turn a city the size of the royal capital of Edras into ruins in a single day. That wasn't even taking into account the people on the backs of the magical beasts. Not only were those people fully equipped with equipment, they even held cannon-like weapons in their hands. Those were the magical weapons of Edras. Not good. Lucy and Naz cried out at the same time. That's the kingdom's magical forces. Even without Lucy and Naz's reminder, Noah knew what was going on. That was because Noah saw a familiar face on the back of one of the leading magical beasts. A head of crimson hair fluttered in the wind. Standing on the back of one of the magical beasts, Elusha looked down at the speeding magic carriage with a cold expression. Around it, there were 3 other magic beasts leading the group. There was also a person standing on each of the 3 magical beasts. There was a burly cabman who looked like a human youth. There was a prideful youth. There was also a man dressed in pink full-body armor. Together with Elusha, the 4 of them stood side by side on the back of the 4 leading magic beasts. All of them cast their gazes towards the speeding magic chariot. Their lofty figures and the thousands of soldiers behind them caused Lucy and Naz's hearts to turn cold. As residents of Idris, how could Lucy and Naz not know who those 4 people were? Captain of the 1st Magical Legion of the Edras Army, Pensalalai. Captain of the 2nd Magical Legion of the Edras Army, Elusha Natwoka. Captain of the 3rd Magical Legion of the Edras Army, Shus. He was the leader of the 4th Magic Legion, Shugboy. In the Kingdom of Edras, the only forces allowed to use magic to arm themselves were the most elite forces of the kingdom, the Magicite Force. Such a legion was led by the 4 captains of the Kingdom of Edras. Now, the 4 captains of the magic war forces were all present. Behind him, there was an entire army and magical beasts armed to the teeth. Such a force was more than enough to wipe out the entirety of Edras. However, at this very moment, they were mobilized because of one person. Oi oi, please spare me. Zeus yelled as if he couldn't take it anymore. Almost a third of the kingdom's magical warfare forces have been mobilized. All 4 squad leaders are here as well. Elusha, don't tell me you're only here to capture the few people in the carriage, right? Even Lily turned to Elusha with a questioning look, not to mention Hugh. However, before Elusha could say anything, Shugboy spoke up. That's the person who easily defeated Elusha. Unlike Elusha, while Shugboy didn't face Noah directly, he hid in the shadows and witnessed the entire battle between Noah and Elusha. Naturally, Shugboy also saw how easily Noah defeated Elusha. Otherwise, how could Shugboy have decisively retreated the moment he was discovered? The reason was that he was scared out of his wits by Noah. Cut the crap. Elusha said coldly. Take him down. Lily and Shugboy looked at each other and nodded. Although Hugh still felt very disdainful, he still gave the order obediently. In the next moment, the soldiers of the demon war army riding on the back of the magical beasts raised the heavy cannons in their hands and aimed at the magic car below. Dense magic power gathered at the muzzles of the cannons. Are they planning to shoot us down directly? Lucy couldn't help but change her expression. What should we do? Although Nazi wasn't afraid, there was a trace of anxiety in his tone. I can't avoid all the cannons. Hearing that, Noah glanced at the flustered Lucy and Nazi and said indifferently, You don't have to worry about it. You don't have to worry about it. Just keep moving forward. After saying that, Noah didn't even give Lucy and Naz the time to react. He opened the car door, flipped over, and leaped onto the roof of the magic-powered car. He slowly stood up and raised his head to look at the sky above. At this moment, Noah and Elusha's eyes met. At the same time, their gazes turned ice-cold almost at the same time. Elusha looked at Noah coldly and raised her hand. Fire! As soon as his voice fell, the demonic beasts mounted on the back of the demonic beasts raised their heavy cannons and aimed at the demonic soldiers below and pulled the triggers of the heavy cannons in their hands. Bang! 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 The standard weapons of the magic forces of the Edra's royal army were similar to the magic cannons of Noya. They could only change the shape of the magic cannons and fire the lowest level of magic spells. However, compared to Noah's powerful magic cannons, the Edra's kingdom's demon war army's magic cannons were far too weak. In the next moment, around Noah's body, intricate diagrams appeared in the air one after another and gathered a shocking amount of mana. Whoosh! The magic formations that seemed to have been imprinted in the air began to vibrate one after another and let out flashes of light. Immediately after, huge beams of light shot out from the intricate magic arrays, soared into the sky, and flew straight into the air. Alusha, Lily, Shus, Shugboy and the rest of the Edra's kingdom's demon war army felt their vision being filled with blinding flashes of light. By the time their vision recovered, beams of light containing terrifying amounts of mana shot into the sky. Feeling the terrifying amount of mana contained within those beams of light, Alusha, Lily, Shus and Shugboy's expressions changed. Then, the huge beams of light directly enveloped the incoming magic bullets, silently annihilating the overwhelming barrage of bullets. After that, the beams of light continued to shoot towards the magical beasts without slowing down in the slightest. Bang! 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 A series of shocking explosions rang out in the air. The cries of the magical beasts echoed throughout the sky along with the cries of the demon war army soldiers. Not long after, in the flames that filled the entire sky, the charred and smoking magical beasts fell to the ground one after another like kites with a broken string. As for the 4 famous captains of the Edra's kingdom's demon war army, they were also enveloped by the flames and disappeared without a trace. In an instant, the most elite of the Edra's kingdom's demon war army was completely wiped out. Even though it was only a third of them. The shock in Lucy and Naz's hearts had long overwhelmed them completely. On the roof of the Arcanitech carriage, Noah looked at the flames coldly before he flipped back into the carriage and calmly said, "Let's continue forward." Lucy and Naz looked at each other in silence. The only thing that could be heard was the heavy silence as the Arcanitech carriage continued its journey towards the royal capital. At the same time, a magical beast flew out from the flames that filled the entire sky while emitting smoke. It was in an extremely sorry state. On the back of that magical beast were 4 people. Apart from Alusha, Lily, Shus and Shugboy, who else could it be? Monster. Shus cried out in fear. That's a monster. Unfortunately, the monster that Theseus was talking about was slowly approaching a bustling city as the magic-powered car drove on. Don't even think about leaving. Alusha's furious roar rang out as she ordered the magical beast to give chase. Chapter 1097. In actuality, Alusha had long known that Noah would definitely come to the royal capital. That was why she, Shus and Shugboy, brought a third of the magical forces to guard the entrance to the royal capital. As for why Alusha knew that Noah would definitely go to the royal capital, the reason was simple. Alusha didn't know that Noah came from Aslan. However, in Edras, as long as one wasn't a citizen of the royal capital, one wouldn't be affected by Faust's tyranny and suffer. And since Noah had the power to easily defeat the second magical force's captain, he would definitely resist and head to the royal capital. That was what Alusha thought. Naturally, Noah, who hadn't experienced Faust's tyranny, wouldn't want to resist and head to the royal capital for that reason. However, even if that wasn't the case, Noah had his own reasons for wanting to head to the royal capital. That was why, while Alusha's guess couldn't have been more wrong, the result was still spot on. That was why Alusha waited for Noah's arrival. Since the 4 captains of the Edra's royal army had been mobilized, there was no way the royal capital wouldn't be on high alert. With that in mind, when the enchanted carriage carrying Noah, Lucy, and Naz finally arrived in front of the imperial city, they saw groups of royal army patrolling the city gates and walls of the imperial city. However, Noah didn't care about those soldiers in the slightest. After disembarking from the magic drive, Noah's first reaction was to look at the sky above the royal capital. There was a huge island floating directly above the capital city. It was like a sun without any heat or light, giving people a feeling of awe from the bottom of their hearts. Noah, on the other hand, didn't feel much awe. However, when he looked at the gigantic island and thought of the queen who called herself a god, Noah's dark eyes slowly narrowed. According to Mishgang, in order to obtain eternal mana, the Queen of Transcendence, who called herself a god, proposed to the king of the kingdom of Edras to use the spatial magic anima to absorb mana from the world of Aslan. In fact, the reason that anima was targeted at Magnoria and Aslan's fairy tale was also the queen's idea. In other words, the Queen of the Transcendence, who thought she was an angel, was the main culprit behind Edras' invasion of Aslan. As for the king of Edras, he was an accomplice through and through. In order to obtain eternal mana, he willingly became the queen's accomplice. To Noah, both the king of the Edras kingdom and the queen of the Surpasser race were his targets. Once he thought about how Aslante's fairy tale would be destroyed in the hands of those two people, Noah couldn't help but feel a burst of ruthlessness rising in his heart. It's impolite not to reciprocate. That's why I'm here. Looking at Noah's back, Lucy and Naz in the magic-powered carriage fell silent. Because what happened next was no longer something they could interfere in. And so, Noah slowly made his way towards the royal capital under the gazes of Naz and Lucy. At the same time, Hermes' boots shook beneath Noah's feet, causing Noah's body to float up into the air. Under such circumstances, Noah seemed to be walking on invisible stairs as he slowly made his way towards the skies of the royal capital. Unlike the other cities of Edras, the royal capital of Edras was like a large-scale entertainment venue. Not only were there amusement parks everywhere, there were even many entertainment facilities on both sides of the streets. Here, the people were laughing and chatting as if they were celebrating somewhere. Smiles were plastered all over their faces. However, this smile was obtained by sacrificing the smiles of others. The citizens of the royal capital knew that this was the only place in Edras where they could use mana as usual. Some could even use it extravagantly. Yet, they still accepted it as it was. Very few would think about how much they had to sacrifice for the happiness of others in order to enjoy what they had now. It wasn't because the citizens of the royal capital were scum who deserved to be slaughtered. That was just the bad habit of humans. Even if the people who lived in the cities with sufficient water knew that the people who lived far away in the desert were short of water, how many of them could really cherish the water source? Similarly, even if the citizens of the royal capital knew how much the citizens of other places yearned for the blessings of mana, how many of them would truly cherish it? If they didn't experience it themselves, they would never be able to understand the pain of others. Thus, to the citizens of the royal capital, everything that happened next was like hell. Look! At first, it was only because someone had accidentally seen something and pointed to the sky in shock. What is that? Amidst that cry of shock, many people raised their heads and looked at the sky. Then, one by one, they were shocked. From the huge island floating above the imperial city, a group of black figures suddenly flew down, sweeping across the sky and swiftly flying in the direction of the imperial palace. It was a group of cats. It was a group of cats with pure white wings that stood on their hind legs like humans. Seeing such a group of cats flying over, the residents on the street were all shocked. Surpassers! It's the Surpassers! It's the angels! Without any hesitation, the citizens of the royal capital all knelt on the ground and kowtowed. As for the army of Surpassers, they came to the square of the palace and looked down from above. Leading them was a Surpasser who looked like a Garfield cat. If Noah was here, he would definitely be shocked. This surpassor's face was exactly the same as Yes. And this surpassor did indeed have a name that made people ridicule him. Two Knights. King of the Humans. Two Knights shouted towards the palace below. Hurry up and come out to pay your respects. As soon as the voice fell, Faust, who was dressed in splendid attire, immediately walked out of the palace. Under the protection of a large number of soldiers, he looked at the army of surpassors high above and could only obediently lower his head. The great surpassors, the King of Humans is here to pay his respects. Ahem. Two Knights coughed dryly and said solemnly. We are here to announce the Queen's decree. God's decree. Faust was shocked. Listen well, King of Humans. Two Knights said with a serious face. We, the Supreme Queen, foresee the destruction of humans. That one sentence made everyone, led by Faust, dumbfounded. What did two Knights just say? The destruction of humans. The destruction of the human race. Faust looked at two Knights in bewilderment. That's right. Two Knights pulled out the sword at his waist and pointed it at Faust. The humans of Edras will be destroyed by an outsider from Aslan. This is what the Queen has explained to us. Wah. What? Faust was shocked again. You're saying that someone from Aslan has come to Edras. This is the Queen's decree, it can't be wrong. Two Knights looked at Faust closely. For the sake of the humans of Edras, we, the Supreme Queen, have ordered that you must kill that intruder from Aslan. Kill that human named Noah Dole. Faust's grip on his scepter slowly tightened, a fierce light flashing in his eyes. In fact, as the King of Edras, Faust had long since harbored evil intentions towards the surpassors who ruled over the entire human race. However, it was undeniable that up until now, every decree of the Queen was like a prophecy. Not a single one of them was false. Therefore, although Faust wasn't completely convinced by Two Knights' words, he at least listened. Faust raised his head and looked at Two Knights with the thought that he would rather kill the wrong person than let the wrong person go. May I ask where that Noah Dole is? When these words left Faust's mouth and reverberated in the surroundings, a voice that seemed like a smile that wasn't a smile suddenly sounded. Are you looking for me? Chapter 1098. Are you looking for me? When a voice that sounded like a laugh that was not a laugh reverberated throughout the square of the palace, whether it was the surpassors or the royal army that followed the king's lead, all of them were startled and looked towards the source of the voice. In the next second, everyone saw it. A person hovered in the air, a pair of pitch-black eyes looking straight down. He glanced at the surpassor, and then at Faust, who was at the forefront of the royal army. A cold glint flashed in his eyes. Faust couldn't help but take a step back from the chilly glint in his eyes. He was annoyed that he was afraid of someone of unknown origin, and he shouted angrily, "What are you talking about? Who are you?" As soon as the voice rang out, the surpassors reacted. Foolish human. The second knight seemed to be very angry. Tell me your name. Noah glanced at the second knight. Although he was surprised that the second knight looked exactly the same as the first knight, he had seen many people who looked exactly like Aslan and Edras and was already used to it. Ignoring the second knight, Noah looked directly at Faust. Are you the King of Edras? This sentence caused Faust's eyes to widen. In Edras, who did not know the king? Unless this person was not from Edras. You. Faust said in shock. Are you the person from Astra? Hearing Faust's words, the surpassing transcendents, who were furious at being ignored by Noah, were all surprised. I see. The second knight's face was tense as he looked directly at Noah. Are you the Noah Doria that Her Majesty mentioned? Hearing this, Noah frowned. How do you know my name? Humph. The second knight seemed to be mocking Noah's ignorance. He pointed the sword in his hand at Noah and loudly declared, "We, the Supreme Queen, are the gods of this world. There is nothing we do not know." Gods. Noah seemed to have heard something funny. He closed his eyes slightly, and when he opened them again, a cold light flashed in his eyes. "What a coincidence, I am a godslayer." As soon as he finished speaking. Boom! Suddenly, a wave of violent magic burst out from Noah's body like a stormy sea. It turned into a substantial shockwave that shook in all directions. Boom, 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 boom. The shockwave made of pure magic swept across the surpassers flying in the sky. It was as if they had been hit by something heavy, and their bodies were sent flying by the shockwave. Including the second knight. In the blink of an eye, the densely packed surpassers flying in the sky were all sent flying. They either smashed into the ground below or smashed into a wall not far away. They fell to the ground with a pained expression on their faces. "You." The second knight, who was also sent flying to the ground, raised his head with difficulty and looked at Noah in disbelief. A mere human dares to attack surpassers. As for the royal army led by Faust, they were also shocked by Noah's attack on surpassers. Faust was the only one who was shocked. He looked at the violent magic swirling around Noah's body like a substantial wave, and his eyes almost popped out of their sockets. What? What a huge amount of magic. Does the people of Astra all have magic of this level in their bodies? After the shock, Faust's eyes began to flash with greed and ecstasy. Good. Very good. This person is mine. Faust had taken a fancy to Noah. No. More accurately, he had taken a fancy to Noah's magic. Go. Go. At once, Faust barked at the royal army around him without hesitation. Take him down. Remember. You must capture him alive. The royal army, who had been awakened by Faust's order, finally reacted. Since they were able to stand by Faust's side, it was only natural that the royal army was equipped with magic as well. Thus, under Faust's orders, the soldiers of the magic army set up their magic cannons and aimed them at Noah. Noah also noticed the greed and ecstasy in Faust's eyes. After understanding Faust's thoughts, Noah laughed. It was a laugh that pierced through one's heart. Do you really want magic that much? One by one, beautiful magic formations suddenly fluctuated in the space around Noah, absorbing the seemingly substantial magic waves that were hovering around Noah. They flowed into them, turning into pure magic light that gradually shone. In that case, I'll give you what you want the most in the most direct way. You have to take it well, Your Majesty. The terrifying magic fluctuations from the sky caused Faust's heart to suddenly shrink, and an expression of horror appeared on his face. Just as the magic and the magic formations was about to turn into light beams and envelop the palace below, a cold, angry shout rang out from the other side of the sky. Don't even think about it. Accompanied by such an angry and cold shout, a huge black shadow suddenly swept over Noah's head. Immediately after, a figure jumped down from the huge black shadow and landed in Noah's direction, following the direction of gravity and the whistling of the wind. Supersonic spear. Rich magic power surged from the cold iron spear in the figure's hand, causing the steel spear to emit a dazzling light. Then, its entire appearance changed. Whoosh! Without any warning, the tip of the spear that had changed its appearance vibrated with an extreme impact force, causing the spear to completely turn into a dazzling meteor. It pierced through the sky at an astonishing speed and violently pierced towards Noah's direction. Clang! The crisp sound of steel colliding with steel spread out in the air like a sound wave. The loud sound of the collision caused many people's eardrums to hurt slightly, and they could not help but cover their ears. Under such circumstances, the two figures that had collided fiercely in mid-air shot straight down. In the end, they crashed heavily into the ground, stirring up a thick cloud of dust. After a while, Alusha retreated from the thick cloud of dust with her spear in hand. She tapped the ground a few times with the tip of her foot before coming to a stop. Her cold gaze shot into the thick cloud of dust like a lethal arrow. At the same time, the gigantic magic beast in the air also landed. On top of it, Lily, Shus, and Shugboy jumped down one after another and landed around Faust, protecting him behind them. Seeing Alusha, Lily, Shus, and Shus appear, Faust breathed a sigh of relief. In terms of battle prowess, the 4 captains of the Edra's army were without a doubt the strongest in the kingdom. With the protection of the 4 captains, there should be no problem. At the very least, that was what Faust thought. After calming down, Faust began to worry about Noah. "You won't kill him, will you?" Faust yelled. "You're not allowed to kill him. Capture him alive." Hearing Faust's words, Alusha furrowed her brow. Capture him alive. Alusha had already been defeated by Noah once, which proved that he was no weaker than Alusha in terms of battle prowess. If that was the case, it would be extremely difficult to capture him alive. Capture him alive. A mocking voice rang out from within the thick cloud of dust. That's right. Only by capturing you alive can the people of this world see how useless the so-called king is. Perhaps, only then will you know what kind of place you've reached your hands into. As those words were spoken, a silhouette walked out from the thick cloud of dust. In his hand, the resplendent golden sacred sword shone with a blinding light that illuminated the entire area. Seeing the silhouette walk out of the cloud of dust, the expressions of those present were all different. Shus and Shus were filled with fear. Lily's expression was solemn. Alusha's eyes were filled with killing intent. Chapter 1099. Whoosh! The inconceivably vast surging mana was like a miniature tornado with Noah as the center, constantly rotating in the center of the square of the palace, filling the entire space with an indescribable pressure that suppressed the hearts of everyone present. Alusha stared coldly at Noah, who seemed to have transformed into the eye of a typhoon, with her palms drenched in sweat. Even so, Alusha still gripped the spear of 10 abstinences tightly and whipped it out. With a spin, the black shadow of the spear tore through the air, bringing with it a powerful gust of wind that blew away some of the pebbles on the ground. The tip of the spear was pointed at the ground as dense mana surged out of Alusha's weapon. However, compared to Noah's mana, which was so dense that it was almost tangible, the amount of mana stored in Alusha's weapon was pitifully low. Faust's gaze towards Noah only grew more and more heated and greedy. Alusha, Lily, Shus, and Shugboy's expressions also grew more and more solemn. Shus and Shus' faces even stiffened up. What's wrong? Noah's gaze swept past Alusha, Lily, Shus, and Shus as he coldly laughed. You're not going to attack. Seeing how easily Noah handled the situation, let alone Alusha and Lily, even Shus and Shus couldn't help but feel a sense of anger. At this point, Alusha and the rest understood how terrifying Noah was. However, whether it was Alusha, Lily, Seuss, or Shogboy, they all understood one thing. If they didn't take Noah down, there would be no way for them to settle this peacefully. That was why they had no choice but to fight to the end. Understanding this, Lily stepped forward. With a flip of his hand, he pulled out a large sword from under his cloak. Although Seuss and Shugboy were a little fearful of Noah, when they saw Alusha and Lily stand out, they immediately clenched their teeth. One of them unsheathed a sword from his waist, while the other pulled out a magic wand from his bosom. In the next moment, with Alusha taking the lead, waves of mana began to surge out of the magical weapons in the hands of the 4 captains of the demonic battle troops, causing waves of powerful aura to rise continuously. They firmly locked onto Noah, causing the atmosphere to become increasingly tense. Gulp! Within the army that surrounded the plaza, someone couldn't help but swallow a mouthful of saliva. At this moment, that voice, which was originally not very clear, was like a huge rock being thrown into a calm lake, causing the entire hostile atmosphere to explode in an instant. Do it! At almost the same time, Alusha and Lily yelled out. The moment the shout fell, the long spear in Alusha's hand suddenly shook with a strong force. She stomped her foot on the ground fiercely. With a bang, she turned into a stream of light and shot straight in the direction of Noah. The moment Alusha moved, Lily, Shus, and Shus followed suit and charged towards Noah's direction alongside Alusha. With a wave of the magic weapons in their hands, the sharp sound of air being torn apart could be heard. The weapons of the 4 captains of the Edra's royal army all transformed into powerful flashes that tore through the air and headed towards Noah. Looking at the 4 flashes of light that shot towards him, Noah's hand trembled slightly. In his hand, the Excalibur was a golden holy sword, and a circle of resplendent light was circulating around the blade. Whoosh! In the next moment, the radiant holy sword trembled as the tip of the sword pierced out, leaving a trail of sword afterimages in its wake as it collided with the 4 flashes of light. Bang! The 4 sharp beams of chi were instantly dispersed by a muffled sound that rang out in unison. However, in the next moment, 4 figures suddenly appeared around Noah and surrounded him. Vacuum spear. The spear in Alusha's hand once again changed its shape in a burst of light, bringing along a wave of chaotic airflow. It tore through the air and turned into a dazzling light. In an instant, it tyrannically plundered the air around Noah, stirring up a terrifying shock wave, and fiercely pierced towards Noah. Mother of Destroyers. The giant sword in the hand of Lily, who was standing beside Noah, trembled violently. His entire body suddenly expanded and turned into a huge heavy sword. Amidst the whistling wind, he slashed down with a heavy force. Command wand. Zeus, on the other hand, was a distance away from Noah. He waved the magic wand in his hand forcefully, and the ribbons around the square that looked like the decorations of some entertainment facility moved. They were like sharp spears that streaked across the air and shot straight at Noah, surrounding the space on his side. Sword of Rose. Shogboy forcefully inserted the magical weapon in his hand into the ground. A strange magical wave reverberated on the ground, causing the ground of the square to violently fluctuate and roll. It was like a tornado made of mud, rubbing against the air as it mercilessly rushed towards Noah. The merciless attacks from 4 directions completely sealed off all of Noah's escape routes. With great momentum, they violently bombarded Noah's location. The 4 attacks caused the air to be completely annihilated. The space seemed to be slightly distorted, and the ground trembled repeatedly, causing ear-piercing buzzing sounds that resounded throughout the sky. However, in the face of those 4 powerful attacks, Noah, who was originally standing still in the center of the battlefield, finally moved. Clang! A dazzling sword light appeared without any warning amidst the crisp sword cry. At this moment, everyone only felt that the whole world seemed to have darkened. The dazzling sword light was like a full moon, bringing along a cold and beautiful moon arc as it slashed towards the surroundings. Absolute sword technique. Form 3 Shadow Moon Dance. The sword light that transformed into a full moon swelled around Noah, welcoming the incoming storm of spears, pitch-black great swords, sharp ribbons, and turbid mud flow. Clang! In an instant, the long spear that carried a shocking storm and the huge sword that carried a terrifying strength were bounced off. Poochie! The ribbons that had transformed into sharp spears were cleanly torn apart with a tearing sound. Dong! The mighty mud flow was cut into 2 halves and exploded. Bam! In an instant, the 4 captains of the Edra's army that were attacking Noah were sent flying by the explosive force of the beautiful moon arc. In the end, Noah defeated the strongest force of Edra's in a single strike. That was the difference between them. Furthermore, it was under the condition that the absolute sword technique's true power wasn't unleashed. After all, the absolute sword technique was a sword dance technique. Only by using divine might in conjunction with the elven device could it unleash its true power. At that moment, while the Excalibur in Noah's hand was an A++ ranked treasure, Noah didn't use divine might. Additionally, the Excalibur wasn't an elven device, so there was no way it could unleash the full power of the absolute sword technique. Even so, Noah was still able to mimic the absolute sword technique's moves and rely on his LV for ability to send the 4 captains of the Edra's army flying in an instant. After that, Noah spun around and charged towards Shus and Shugboy. As their expressions changed, he gave them a heavy kick on their chests. Bam! Another dull thud rang out as the captains of the 3rd and 4th Magic War Legions were sent flying like kites with their strings cut before crashing heavily into the walls of the building. Chapter 1100. Poochie. Seuss and Shugboy both spat out mouthfuls of blood as they slammed into the wall. Their bodies softly slid down to the ground, no longer able to get up. Seuss. Shugboy. Seeing Seuss and Shugboy, who were both captains of the Devil Army, being defeated in an instant, Alusha and Lily's hearts trembled. That's it. Noah turned around and cast his gaze on Alyssa and Lily, whose expressions had changed abruptly, and spoke faintly. It seems that these 2 captains of the Devil Army are different from you. This point could be seen from the magic weapons used by Seuss and Shugboy. Seuss's command wand seemed to be able to give life to inanimate objects and control them. Shugboy's rose sword was able to soften everything it touched. It was also a magic that could only be used against inanimate objects. These 2 people's magic was the type of magic that was used by manipulating existing objects. Apart from the magic, there was nothing special about them. That is to say, Seuss and Shugboy were only relying on the power of their magic weapons to fight. On the other hand, although Alyssa's Spear of 10 Precepts had 10 forms and 10 effects, each of them could only be unleashed when Alyssa was the one controlling them. As for Lily's Mother of Destroyer, it was even simpler. It was only a magic weapon that could freely change its shape. Both of them used close combat magic and magic weapons. If they didn't have a certain level of fighting ability, how could they use such magic weapons? On the other hand, Seuss and Shugboy's magic weapons relied on pure magic effects. They relied too much on the power of items. Once the items were no longer effective, they could be dealt with in minutes. Only you 2 are a bit interesting. In front of Alusha and Lily, Noah raised the Excalibur in his hand and pointed it at the stiff-faced Faust. He spoke indifferently to Alusha and Lily, so, you 2 have to work hard and see if you can defeat me. Otherwise, I don't need to say what will happen to the king you are loyal to. You should understand, right? These words made Faust's face turn furious, while Alyssa and Lily's faces darkened at the same time. In the next second, Alusha and Lily's figures suddenly trembled and turned into 2 indistinct shadows, separating from each other. In the end, they formed a rather strange arc, as if they had purposely made 2 large circles, one on the left and one on the right, towards Noah. Sonic Spear. The long spear in Alusha's hand suddenly changed shape. The magic surging on it caused Alusha's speed to suddenly increase dramatically. As her figure flashed, the sharp sound of the air breaking was incessant. Even if it was not the true speed of sound, it was indescribably fast. Obviously, the so-called Sonic Spear was a magic that could increase the speed of movement and attack by several times. As for Lily, it was even simpler. A pair of pure white wings unfolded on his back. With a flap of his wings, his speed increased to a level comparable to Alusha's. Glancing at the 2 indistinct shadows rushing towards him, Noah's eyes flashed, but his body did not move an inch. After a short moment, a stab and a slash suddenly arrived, causing the sharp energy to tear through the air with ear-piercing sounds. One on the left and one on the right, they fiercely attacked Noah. One on the left and one on the right, two completely opposite directions. It was destined that if Noah intended to defend, he would only be able to defend against one of them, while the other would inevitably hit him. Unfortunately, even the attacks launched by Alusha, Lily, Seuss, and Shogboy from 4 directions had been neutralized by Noah, not to mention the attacks from 2 directions. Thus, under the countless gazes of the surrounding devil army, until Alusha's fierce stab and Lily's sharp slash gradually arrived, the Excalibur in Noah's hand shook. Clang! Amidst the crisp sword cry, 2 sword lights suddenly flashed at the same time, shooting out and heavily colliding with the long spear in Alusha's hand and the huge sword in Lily's hand. Clang! Amidst the simultaneous sounds of collision, a terrifying force that seemed to have materialized gushed out from the 2 sword lights. Bang! A low muffled sound rang out in the field. The astonishing force from the 2 sword lights gushed out like a flood, directly causing Alusha and Lily's figures to explosively retreat by nearly a dozen steps. Every step left a deep mark on the ground. In terms of physical strength, Lily seemed to be much stronger than Alusha. After a short while, he stabilized his body, but when he felt the numbness in his sword-wielding hand, his heart was somewhat shocked. This guy, what a terrifying strength! Just as this thought flashed across Lily's mind, a voice that seemed to laugh faintly sounded beside him. It's not just strength. All the hair on Lily's body suddenly stood up in an instant. Beside Lily, a figure seemed to have shuttled through the cracks in space and suddenly appeared. Lily, who felt a chill in his heart, almost subconsciously grabbed the huge sword in his hand. With a whistling gust of wind, he viciously slashed at the figure beside him. Clang! The golden holy sword and the pitch-black huge sword were like needles against each other as they collided with each other, giving rise to the sound of metal clashing against metal. However, those with discerning eyes could see that Noah's skill was definitely superior. As for why, at this moment, the tip of the golden holy sword in Noah's hand actually pointed at the huge sword that Lily had slashed horizontally, blocking it. That was not a flat blade, but a straight line of the blade. Noah was actually able to use the tip of his sword to precisely point at the straight sword edge. His eyesight was strong, and his skill was simply unimaginable. However, a fierce light appeared in Lily's eyes. He actually abandoned the sword in his hand and with a fierce aura, he pounced in front of Noah. In the next moment, Lily stretched out both hands and under Noah's astonished expression, he firmly grabbed Noah's shoulders. Then, Lily let out a low roar. Now is the time. Following Lily's low roar, Noah felt it. A figure instantly flashed behind Noah. Let me show you the strongest form of my Spear of 10 Precepts. The magical weapon in Alusha's hand emitted a shocking light, turning into an extremely gorgeous ceremonial spear. Holy Spear. Holy Stone World. On the gorgeous ceremonial spear, a bright light surged, causing the air around the spear body to become completely chaotic. It was like a meteor that contained a terrifying power, but also like a meteorite that directly struck out. Amidst the incessant sound of wind, it violently blasted in the direction of Noah. The terrifying power caused a shocking loud sound. At this moment, an extremely violent shock wave mixed with a blinding light, like an exploding star, shook the square of the palace, setting off layers of terrifying wind and waves that swept in all directions. The soldiers of the royal army's devil army, who were originally quite a distance away, could not even react in time and were directly blown away by the terrifying wind and waves. Faust, who was protected by a group of soldiers, was not spared either. He was cleanly blasted out and crashed onto the ground, rolling a few times before coming to a stop. As for the center of the field, it had already been enveloped by a light wave that seemed to have materialized. It was as if a white sun had directly hit the ground, setting off bursts of violent winds and waves. It stirred up layers of terrifying impacts, causing the ground to crack and explode one by one. This scene lasted for an unknown period of time. At least, Faust felt as if a long time had passed before the violent shock waves and waves that were spreading out gradually weakened, and the strong light that filled the center of the square also slowly dimmed. With such a terrifying attack, coupled with Lily's reckless self-sacrifice, Faust did not believe that he could not take down Noah. However, the scene that appeared in front of Faust finally caused him to be completely stunned. Chapter 11:01. The violent wind and dazzling light gradually subsided, causing the entire square of the palace, which seemed to be shaking the heavens and earth a second ago, to slowly return to its calm state. If it weren't for the fact that the ground was already riddled with holes and the surrounding demon army soldiers were lying on the ground moaning and groaning, and there was even a huge crater at the center of the impact, no one would believe that such a terrifying thing had just happened. However, this was not something that Faust was concerned about. At this moment, the king of Idris was staring at the center of the huge crater with a blank expression. He saw that there was a spot in the center of the huge crater that was completely undamaged. There were 3 people standing on that spot. And these 3 people's performances were completely different. Noah, who was tightly held by Lily by the shoulder, had a calm expression on his face. Lily, who was tightly holding on to Noah's shoulder, had a look of shock on his face. As for Elusha, who was still standing behind Noah and maintaining the most powerful spear of the Holy Stone, she stared straight ahead. Her delicate face was slightly pale as she spat out word by word. Can't do, not to mention Elusha, even Lily and Faust couldn't believe that Noah was completely unscathed under that terrifying attack. Not even a single strand of hair fell. As for the cause of this, it was a shield. It was a shield that was completely black like obsidian, with a banshee head full of snake-like hair engraved on the front. On the head, there was a pair of snake-like eyes that flickered with a scarlet luster. If a knowledgeable person were to see this shield, they would immediately recognize its origin. That was because this shield was the same as the Excalibur. Once it was exposed, it would be impossible to hide its real name from the public. Aegis. In Greek mythology, this was a shield known as a divine shield. However, in Greek mythology, the Aegis shield had 2 sides. One side was owned by Zeus, the king of the gods in Greek mythology. Thus, it was also known as the Aegis shield. The other side was owned by Athena, the goddess of wisdom in Greek mythology. It was said that these 2 shields were made by Hephaestus, the god of fire, who was also known as the god of forging, using the fur of a sheep that had once provided milk to Zeus in myths. Although they were made of sheepskin, the 2 shields contained an astonishing amount of power. It was said that the Aegis of Zeus could not even cause the slightest bit of damage to it. Moreover, as long as it was lightly waved, the shield could create a storm. If it was placed in the sky, it would even darken the sky. And when Zeus picked it up, the sky would clear up. As for Athena's Aegis, it was fused with the head of the snake demon Medusa that was chopped off by Perseus. Anyone who was looked at by the eyes of the snake demon Medusa on the shield would be turned into stone. At this point, the body of the shield that blocked Elusha's final blow was already on the verge of being revealed. It was the Aegis of the goddess of wisdom, Athena. At this moment, this divine shield, whose reputation was not inferior to the Excalibur, was floating in the air behind Noah, blocking Elusha's spear of the sacred stone. When Lili sacrificed himself to capture Noah, Elusha released her strongest attack on the restricted Noah. Astonishingly, this shield appeared out of nowhere and completely blocked Elusha's strongest attack. Ignoring Elusha and Lili's shock, Noah acted as if nothing had happened and closed his eyes. To be able to force me to take out this shield, you should be proud. As soon as he finished speaking, golden ripples suddenly appeared around the Aegis. Within the ripples, silver chains with different shapes at the tip and flowing with golden light burst out like long whips. With Noah as the center, they crazily danced. Bang! Alusha and Lily, who were completely unable to react, were ruthlessly smashed by the crazily dancing silver chains. In a neat muffled sound, they were both sent flying and smashed onto the ground. Their bodies rubbed against the ground for quite a distance. Goo, Og, Alusha and Lily, who had no means of defense, let out a muffled groan. After falling to the ground, their bodies trembled, but they could not stand up no matter how hard they tried. At this moment, the silver chains and the pitch-black shield turned into a burst of light particles and dissipated in the air, returning to their owner's treasury, including the Excalibur in Noah's hand. At this point, in the entire palace square, apart from Noah, no one could stand like they had at the beginning. Whether it was the Surpassers who were blown away by Noah at the beginning, the Devil Army members who were affected by the aftermath of Alusha's strongest attack, or the 4 captains, all of them were scattered all over the ground. Noah stood in the middle of the messy field that was full of people and cats. There were potholes everywhere, and there was a huge hole in the middle. Noah stood in the only undamaged spot, looked around, and then cast his gaze on Faust. Faust, who was paralyzed on the ground, suddenly trembled, and a somewhat fearful expression finally appeared on his aged face. Under Faust's gaze, Noah lifted his feet and walked towards him step by step. Suddenly, Faust seemed to be stimulated by something. He moved his butt and followed Noah as he walked and retreated. His voice trembled as he muttered absent-mindedly. Don't come over. Don't come over." Noah acted as if he did not hear anything. He stared at Faust and continued to walk towards him. "Don't come over. Don't come over." Faust's voice finally raised. "Didn't I tell you not to come over?" After saying that, Faust suddenly raised the scepter in his hand. Whing! The tip of the scepter that Faust raised suddenly bloomed with a strong light. Immediately after, Faust's scepter shot out a bolt of lightning, which cut through the air and landed directly on Noah's body. Bang! An explosion sounded, and a burst of dense fire and smoke spread out, shrouding Noah's position. Seeing this, Faust's face was filled with joy, but the next second, he immediately froze. Within the dense fire and smoke, Noah's figure continued to walk out, unscathed. Even his expression did not change in the slightest. Ah! Faust madly waved the scepter in his hand again and again, causing streaks of lightning to turn into gorgeous flashes that enveloped Noah's body. Bang 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 bang. All of a sudden, continuous explosions sounded one after another. Bursts of flames and smoke also vibrated from Noah's body one after another. However, Noah still acted as if he did not feel anything. He ignored the bolts of lightning that shot towards him, withstanding them as he walked towards Faust. If it was Alusha, Lily, Seuss, or even Shogboy's magic that did not directly affect Noah's body, then so be it. A direct magic attack like Faust's would not have any effect in front of Noah's curse resistance. Therefore, when Noah arrived in front of Faust, the mana stored in Faust's scepter had already been exhausted, but it did not even mess up Noah's clothes. Then, under Faust's horrified expression, Noah suddenly stretched out his hand, grabbed Faust's collar, and lifted him up. "When I think about how you almost threatened my companions, I feel like vomiting." As soon as he finished speaking, a powerful fist suddenly landed on Faust's face. Bang! With a muffled sound, Faust screamed as he was sent flying by Noah's punch. He smashed into the ground not far away, and after twitching a few times, he could no longer move. Chapter 11:02. Bam! When Noah's fist landed heavily on King Edris's face and sent him flying with a single punch, those who still had some semblance of consciousness began to tremble in fear. Looking at the ruined plaza and the scattered humans and surpassers who couldn't get up, even the second knight's face turned pale. The extinction of humanity, wasn't it? The nightmarish scene in front of him was like the first act that symbolized the destruction of mankind, wasn't it? Of course, that was an exaggeration. It was impossible for Noah to destroy the humans of Edris for no reason, and it was even more impossible for him to slaughter all the humans of Edris for no reason. Noah only had two goals for his trip to Edris. First, to find the culprit behind the anima attack on Magnolia and settle the score. Second, to completely eliminate the threat of the anima to Aslan. Apart from that, there was no third goal. Unfortunately, the second knight didn't know what Noah was thinking and believed in the orders of the Queen of Surpassers. All of this was just the beginning of the extinction of humanity. Putting aside the fact that two knights had been accused of something that didn't exist for no reason, his objective was to uncover the King of Edris and get rid of the royal army that was aiding him. To Noah, this was only the beginning of his journey to Edris. After all, Noah still had to find the magical device of the anima and destroy it. He also had to settle the score with the Queen of Surpassers. Furthermore, if he only destroyed the magical device of the anima, he couldn't guarantee that there wouldn't be a second anima in this world. In order to prevent the anima from becoming a threat to the guild and his companions, Noah and Mr. Gang had already discussed a countermeasure before coming to Edris. A countermeasure that could change the world. That was why this was just the beginning. Looking at Faust, who had completely fainted, Noah turned around and immediately planned to leave. However, at that moment, a voice squeezed out with great difficulty. "It's not over yet." Hearing this voice, Noah narrowed his eyes and turned to look at the source of the voice. There, Alusha used the spear of the 10 Commandments to support her body. She stood up with great difficulty and stared at Noah. "I haven't lost yet." This scene was very similar to when Noah defeated Alusha. "I can't lose." Alusha gritted her teeth so hard that blood flowed out of her gums. She struggled to support her body and raised the magical weapon in her hand, aiming it at Noah. "I can't lose." After saying that, Alusha stomped on the ground and charged towards Noah. The spear of the 10 Commandments in her hand turned into a ray of light and violently pierced towards Noah's head. However, in the face of this fierce attack, Noah tilted his head slightly. Swoosh! The sharp tip of the spear brushed past Noah's cheek and stabbed into the air. Alusha, who had used all her strength to stab with the spear, was already exposed. As long as Noah threw a punch that was neither too light nor too heavy, then that punch would definitely hit Alusha and make her unable to stand up again, right? However, Noah didn't move. He looked at Alusha's face and said coldly, "You've already lost." It was the same as when he defeated Alusha. This time, Noah said the same thing. And it was this sentence that made Alusha go crazy. "I didn't lose." As if she didn't care about her injured body, Alusha shouted crazily. "For the eternal magic. I can't lose." After saying that, the spear of the 10 Commandments in Alusha's hand turned into a series of spear shadows and continuously shot towards Noah's direction. In the face of the continuous thrusts, Noah's expression didn't change in the slightest. He just gently moved his feet, and like a piece of paper, he dodged Alusha's crazy thrusts one by one. On the other hand, Alusha was still roaring madly while thrusting forward like a madman. "How can I lose? If I lose, this world will completely lose its magic. How can I lose? How can I lose?" This sentence, rather than saying it to Noah, it was more like Alusha was saying it to herself. Relying on this determination, Alusha was able to squeeze out the energy that she shouldn't have left and crazily attacked Noah. As a person of Aslan, you enjoy things that we don't have. How can you understand our despair? How can you understand our fear? How can you understand our uneasiness? Whether it was in Aslan or Edras, magic was a part of civilization. People used magic to make fires and cook. People used magic to transport themselves. People used magic to communicate. People used magic to do their work. To the people of Aslan and Edras, magic could be said to be something that they relied on for survival. And these magic, if they wanted to activate it, all required magic. Without magic, it would be like modern humans without electricity and steam. The entire society would return to ancient times. Who wouldn't feel uneasy? Who wouldn't be afraid? Who wouldn't be afraid? Gazing at Noah's indifferent expression, Alyssa gritted her teeth and finally yelled out. You're right. Once the magic is exhausted, this world will be destroyed. This sentence finally made Noah react. Once the magic is exhausted, the world will be destroyed. Raising his head fiercely, looking at the crazy Alyssa, Noah's face was filled with extreme anger. Stop joking. Dodging the incoming spear, Noah clenched his fist and punched out. Ping dash. The heavy punch landed on Alyssha's abdomen without any deviation, making Alyssha's body bow. At the same time, Noah raised his knee and heavily hit Alyssha's chin, making Alyssa groan and her whole body float in the air. That's right. I don't know how desperate, fearful, and uneasy humans will be if the magic of this world is exhausted. But I understand the world better than any of you. When Alyssa was floating in the air, a hand suddenly stretched out and grabbed Alyssha's collar, fiercely dragging Alyssa back. Even if they are destroyed to pieces, they still don't give up hope. An elbow hit Alyssha's face, making Alyssa stagger back a few steps. Even if they lose their other half, they are still waiting for another chance to recover. A heavy punch landed on the other side of Alyssha's face, making Alyssha's body tremble violently and continuously retreated. Even if they are lost in a place that doesn't belong to them, they still emit their own light. A whip leg with a whistling wind kicked Alyssha's abdomen fiercely, making Alyssha's mind blank. She could no longer feel any pain. They are so strong, how can they be destroyed because of a mere magic exhaustion? Before Alyssa could bend down again, Noah suddenly grabbed Alyssha's throat and lifted her up. Looking at Alyssa, who had lost all strength to resist, with her hands and feet hanging down, and even her eyes unfocused, Noah coldly snorted. You guys, don't underestimate this world. After saying this, Noah suddenly let go of his hand and threw out another punch. Bang! The last punch finally made Alyssa fly out like a kite with a broken string, hitting the trunk of a tree. She softly slid down and sat on the ground. Her vision was already blurred. However, Alyssa still stared at Noah, who was standing in front of her, tears falling from her eyes. We just want to survive. Hearing this, Noah stared at Alyssa, who was sitting on the ground leaning against the tree trunk. The anger in his heart gradually subsided, and he closed his eyes. Without magic, humans still have physical strength. Without magic, humans still have bodies. As long as they have hands and feet, they can continue on. Even if it is a difficult situation, they can still choose to move forward. This is what humans are like. Slowly turning around, with his back facing Alyssa, Noah's voice echoed clearly. The world only provides humans with a path and shelter, it will never provide you with life. How to survive is not dependent on the world, but on yourself. After finishing his sentence, Noah ignored Alyssa and directly left under Alyssha's gaze. Looking at Noah's gradually fading back, Alyssha's eyes fluctuated, and she gradually lost her mind. Rely on yourself. The pain from her body began to return, and Alyssha's mind gradually regained its clarity. At this moment, Alyssha's uneasiness, fear, and despair towards the result of magic exhaustion did not disappear, but it was forcefully squeezed into another kind of emotion. This kind of emotion was called hope. Thus, Noah's words were firmly imprinted in the heart of this seemingly cold and strong, but in fact weak and powerless girl. And the world, under Elisha's silence, continued to operate as usual, constantly strengthening itself. How could it be destroyed? Chapter 1103. It was a rather spacious workshop. There was a gigantic magical device in the middle of the workshop that was embedded with many magic crystals. In order to find this magic workshop, Noah had to capture countless soldiers along the way before he finally figured out the way to this place. After all, while the workshop wasn't that secluded, normal soldiers wouldn't even come here. That was because the Arcanitech devices in this workshop were related to the future of Edris. After pushing open the luxurious door, Noah walked in. "You're here." The moment Noah entered, a voice rang out and entered Noah's ears. Noah was not surprised at all as he raised his head and looked ahead. In front of the gigantic magical instrument, there was a figure holding a staff with his back facing Noah. He didn't even turn around, as if he had known that Noah would come there sooner or later. He simply stared at the gigantic magical instrument as if he was in a daze. Looking at that figure, Noah also seemed to have known that he would be there. He sighed. "I knew that you would come here before me. My apologies." Mishgang laughed bitterly. "I don't really want to face the people of Edris head-on." Noah silently stepped forward and stood next to Mr. Gang. Both of them looked at the gigantic Magitech instrument and suddenly spoke after a long while. "Because that's someone you're quite close to, right?" Mishgang fell silent. In fact, Noah had already made some guesses after learning about Edris. Mishgang's identity couldn't be simple, right? If Mishgang was just a normal citizen of Edris, how could he know so much about anima? If Mishgang was just a normal citizen of Edris, how could he know the way to Aslan? If Mishgang was just a normal citizen of Edris, how could he have been able to stop the activation of anima for so many years? If Mishgang was just a normal citizen of Edris, how could he become an S-ranked magus on par with Elusha and Laxus when he couldn't use magic on his own and could only rely on magic weapons? Perhaps, if there was only one of them, it could only be a coincidence. However, with so many coincidences added together, it was inevitable. That was why Noah was certain that Mishgang's identity in Edris wasn't simple. It was very likely that Mishgang was a member of the royal family of Edris. That was why Mishgang was so clear about the anima project initiated by the king of the kingdom of Edris. That was why Noah had a guess about Mishgang's identity. "I beat your father up. Aren't you going to say anything?" Noah said coldly. "Prince Jalal." The air seemed to turn heavy all of a sudden. Mishgang didn't answer, but asked the question abruptly. "You didn't make things difficult for Lily, did you?" "Why?" Noah raised an eyebrow. "Are you on good terms with Lily?" "Lily is my savior," Mishgang said as he tightened his grip on the staff in his hand. As a surpasser, Lily should have lived in Extania and enjoyed the respect of humans. However, he was chased out by the surpasser race for the sake of saving me, who was injured when I was young. In Edris, all humans were governed by surpassers who called themselves angels. As a god, the queen had the power to decide the life and death of humans and control their numbers. If Mishgang had really been severely injured when he was young, then the Transcendents believed that it was the queen who had decided on his death. Under such circumstances, if Lily saved Mishgang, who was on the verge of death as a human, the surpassers would think that he was disobeying the queen. Additionally, Lily brought Mishgang back to Extania to save him. That was a taboo in Extania, where humans weren't allowed to enter. As a result, Lily was chased out of Extania. That was also the reason why a supreme being who should be worshipped by humans would become the leader of the magic forces of the Edris royal army. "I see," Noah said with a nod. "Don't worry. I only made him lose his ability to fight. I didn't injure him that badly." That's good, Mishgang said with relief. The scene once again returned to its silent state. Have you really made up your mind? Noah asked all of a sudden. If that's the case, the world will truly descend into chaos. Hearing Noah's words, a hint of hesitation flashed across Mishgang's eyes. However, he soon regained his resolve. Chaos is only temporary. In a situation where we can only face reality, people will quickly get back on their feet in order to survive. However, if we don't solve the problem of mana in this world, the conflict will never disappear. So, instead of inciting conflict for the sake of eternal mana, wouldn't it be better to let go of what should be lost and let mana disappear from this world? Noah couldn't help but sigh. I have to say, you are quite decisive. Super Secondary Spatial Magic, Anima. The use of this spell was to open up a pathway between Azrand and Edris and absorb Azrand's mana into Edris for Edris to use. Naturally, since he was able to absorb Aslan's mana into Edris, then as long as he reversed the anima, he would be able to reverse the flow of Edris' mana into Aslan. That was what Mishgang was prepared to do. As long as mana forever disappears from this world, magic can no longer be used. Even anima is the same. Mishgang's tone was not perplexed at all. When that happens, anima will no longer be a threat to Azrand. Isn't that what you want to do? But I didn't want to go to this extent at first, Noah said calmly. At first, I only wanted to destroy this magical device and get rid of the culprit. I wanted to change the world to someone more pleasing to the eye so that they wouldn't have any ill intentions towards Azrand. However, that was only treating the symptoms and not the root cause. As long as the problem of mana exists in this world, the conflict over mana will never stop. Under such circumstances, Azrand, who is full of mana, will not be able to stay out of it. Mishgang turned around and looked at Noah. Moreover, didn't you not get rid of the culprit? Hearing that, Noah was speechless. After a while, he turned around and looked at Mishgang. Who do you think I'm doing this for? Mishgang was speechless as well. Why didn't Noah get rid of Faust? Other than the fact that he was Mishgang's father, was there a second reason why Noah would spare the life of the greedy king who had designs on his guild and companions? If the problem of anima wasn't completely solved, then for the sake of his guild and companions, Noah wouldn't spare the life of that greedy bastard. Now, since you've done so much for both Azran and Edris, then I don't mind giving you face. Noah turned around. After all, you are also my companion. With that, Noah walked towards the door. Just as Noah was about to step out of the door, Mishgang's grateful and reluctant voice sounded. Thank you. Anne. Goodbye. The corners of Noah's mouth involuntarily lifted into an untraceable arc. Soon after, he walked out without looking back. Now, there was only one problem left. The sky gradually darkened, as if it could predict what would happen next. The atmosphere became extremely oppressive. Braving the cold air, Noah flew towards the horizon with the help of Hermes' boots. There was only one goal. That was the huge island floating in the air. Extania. Chapter 1104. When Noah controlled Hermes' boots to slowly land on the huge island called Extania, an indescribable silence pervaded the entire space of the island. Regardless of the strange atmosphere, Noah raised his eyes and looked around. Noah had landed in the center of Extania. Extania, on the other hand, was a huge city built by transcendence. In other words, at this moment, Noah had landed in the center of the city called Extania. There were many buildings around him. Some of the buildings were as big as human residences, while others were smaller. They were suitable for transcendents like Habi and Shaluru to live in. On such a street surrounded by buildings of various sizes, cats that looked completely different in appearance, body shape, and even the color of their fur were walking around like humans. They were looking at Noah, who had descended from the sky, and were exchanging glances with each other. Human. Is that a human? He looks like a human. It was no wonder that the Transcendents were so shocked. In Edras, Transcendents were like angels to humans. Icastania, where the angels lived, was naturally a paradise for the humans of Edras. Even though this heaven wasn't as unreachable as in the legends, it was still very sacred in its position. The Transcendent Elders, led by the Queen, strictly forbade humans from entering Ixtania. In the past, Lili had only brought a single human back to Ixtania before being chased out. One could only imagine how unbelievable it was for a human to come to Ixtania. However, Noah didn't even care about the Surpasser's expressions of disbelief. All he said was, "It's fine, but it's fine." He only said indifferently, "Tell your queen to come out." His words caused the entire Ixtania to fall into a dead silence. A moment later, the transcendent cultivators in the area began to get angry. A mere human dares to trespass in Ixtania and ask the queen to come out and see him. How dare he? Where's the Royal Guard Division? Where are the most elite combat divisions of our Surpassers? Hurry up and inform the Royal Guard Division. Tell them to apprehend this insolent human. Apprehend him. Apprehend him. One by one, the Transcendents shouted. Their arrogant voices grew louder and louder, as if Noah had committed an unforgivable crime. The atmosphere gradually turned sour. Noah's brows furrowed. His gaze turned cold as he scanned his surroundings. Immediately, wherever Noah's cold gaze fell, the Surpassers froze. The anger on their faces turned into fear, and they were rendered speechless. "Looks like I'll have to find her myself." Noah's voice echoed in the surroundings. "There's no other way. I don't have much time left. Since you don't want the queen to come out, I'll have to use a little more violence. Tell her that I'm here." As soon as he finished speaking, Noah's body began to emit a magical aura. Sensing the magical aura, the Transcendents' hearts began to tremble. At this moment, a mature woman's voice sounded. It was filled with helplessness and urgency. "Please wait." Along with such a voice, the sinister atmosphere at the scene seemed to have solidified all of a sudden. It did not continue to rise, but it also did not descend. It just stood there stiffly. The magical aura on Noah's body also became sluggish. It slowly retracted back into his body. Then, Noah turned his head and looked at the front of the street. The surrounding Surpassers also subconsciously turned their gazes over, and then all of them cried out in shock. That's... In front of Noah's line of sight, a few figures suddenly appeared and approached. They were also a group of Transcendents. However, they were a group of Transcendents who wore luxurious clothes. At a glance, one could tell that they were not ordinary Transcendents. At the very front of this group of Transcendents was a female Transcendent. She was wearing luxurious new clothes and expensive jewelry. She was also holding a scepter tightly in her hand. Seeing this female Transcendence, all of the Transcendents reacted and immediately lowered their heads in fear. Seeing this, Noah understood. After sizing up the female Transcendents, Noah frowned deeply. "You're the Transcendents' queen." At this moment, Noah's voice was filled with suspicion. There was no other reason. Noah did not sense any magical aura from the Transcendents' queen. At most, her aura was a bit special. Until now, Noah's sensory abilities had only failed when facing Orpheus. Apart from that, he had never made a mistake. As such, Noah was certain that this Transcendent's queen was either like Orpheus and had power that he could only look up to, or she was just an ordinary Transcendence. In fact, the Transcendent's queen smiled sadly. "You can call me Shawget. As for the queen, that's all I can do." After hearing this, not to mention Noah, even the Transcendents around him were stunned. Only the Transcendence elders who supported the Transcendence Queen lowered their heads and sighed with guilt and despair. Noah's frown deepened. He looked at Shauget with a hint of impatience. "What are you trying to do?" Shauget smiled slightly, but her smile was more or less filled with sadness. "I'm just stating a fact." Saying this, Shauget unbuttoned the new clothes on his shoulders, removed the accessories on his body, and loosened the scepter in his hand. Not long after, a female surpasser appeared in front of everyone. She looked no different from a normal female surpasser. She was much smaller than a normal human being. To be able to single-handedly defeat the entire kingdom of Edras, defeat the magic army, and overthrow the king of Edras, you must be an amazing sorcerer in Aslan, right? Shauget said as she closed her eyes. "That's why, you should be able to tell that I'm not a god or a queen. I don't have any outstanding power or status. I'm just an ordinary Transcendence." Looking at the Transcendence with her eyes closed and head lowered, there was no trace of nobility to speak of. She was just an ordinary Transcendence. When they heard her words, the Transcendents around her were completely stunned. Noah stared at Shauget, then at the stunned Transcendents around him. He could feel the anger in his heart rising. Mishgang had said that the Queen of the Transcendents was the one who caused Edras to harbor ill intentions towards Astra. She was the one who suggested to Faust that he could obtain mana from Isrand, which led to the kingdom of Edras developing anima and attacking Isrand in order to obtain eternal mana. That was why Noah had chosen to come here to settle the score with Shauget. She was also an existence known as a god in Edras. She was the one who ruled over humans and Transcendents. She could even decide the life and death of humans. Noah had already prepared himself for a huge battle. But what was she trying to do now? Perhaps she had seen through Noah's thoughts. Shauget finally revealed a bitter smile. "Actually, I'm not the queen of the Transcendents. I'm just an ordinary Transcendence. The so-called queen and god are all fake." That one sentence caused all the Transcendents to feel their minds go blank. They couldn't react at all and could only stare blankly at Shauget. That gaze seemed to be tormenting Shauget, causing her to close her eyes in pain. It was obvious that apart from the elders who supported Shauget, the other Transcendents didn't know about this. Chapter 1105. Actually, even though we surpassers possess magic that the humans of Edras do not possess, our fighting prowess is not that great. We have been bullied by the humans since a long time ago. In front of all the stunned surpassers, Haggard closed his eyes, clasped his hands, and began to speak softly. At that time, the people even began to question their own existence. They even began to feel confused about their own survival. They completely lost the confidence to continue living, causing the entire race of surpassers to sink into the abyss of extinction. If this continues, I'm sure our race will be truly destroyed, right? Haggard said with a gloomy smile. In order to restore the confidence of those clansmen, and to prevent them from being bullied by humans, I discussed with the elders of the clan. In the end, we decided to tell a lie that could even deceive our clansmen and the entire world. A lie. Noah's eyes flashed as he looked at Haggard. So that's why you said you're not a queen or an omnipotent god. Yes, and that is the truth. I am just a normal surpasser. Haggard shook his head. No, it is not right to call me a normal surpasser. Compared to the rest of our race, I have a very special ability. Special ability? Noah was taken aback. Look, even if I call myself a god and pretend to be very powerful to deceive the humans and make them fear us so that they will no longer target us surpassers, there's no way they'll believe me if I just say it verbally, Haggard explained. However, my special ability allows me to make these words more believable and make the humans believe that I am a god. With Haggard's reminder, Noah recalled something. Why would the queen of the surpassers be called a god? It was because the Queen of the Surpassers had the power to decide the life and death of humans. She had the power to control the population of humans. I do not have that kind of power, Haggard admitted. I just have the ability to foresee things, and I can more or less foresee some things in the future. Hearing this, Noah understood. Indeed. Haggard did not have the power to decide the life and death of humans. The only thing he had was the ability to predict the time of death. Humans who don't know about this gradually believe that I have the power to decide the life and death of humans and manage the humans in this world. Shagat smiled weakly. It was because of this that the so-called God became more and more convincing. My people became angels that served God and were revered and worshipped by humans. Haggard's words caused the other surpassers to look at each other. They could see the despair in each other's eyes. It turned out that the so-called gods and angels were nothing more than an illusion. Surpassers. It was a rather ironic name. They made it sound so aloof, but in the end, weren't they just a weak race that could only rely on lies to maintain their status and instill fear in the hearts of the humans to protect themselves because they were powerless against the humans? Seeing Noya frowning after hearing Shargade's words, the Surpassers felt the urge to run away when they recalled how they had been so aggressive in front of this powerful human who had the power to destroy the entire army of Edris and how Noya had threatened to take him down. However, Noah wasn't going to argue with a bunch of ignorant commoners. Furthermore, Noah didn't care whether the transcendent status of the transcendent race was real or not. Then why did you have Faust attack Aslan? Noah narrowed his eyes as he looked at Haggard. Do you know that because of your decision, my guild and my companions were almost turned into mana for you? As he said that, Noah locked his aura onto Haggard, causing him to feel suffocated and his body to tremble. I am very sorry. Haggard could only squeeze out the words with great difficulty. Because we have become the gods and angels of Edris, we are omnipotent existences to the humans. When the mana in this world began to dry up, the human king asked us for help, so, in order to not let your lie be exposed, you proposed to Faust the idea of absorbing magic from Astra, which directly led to the appearance of anima and indirectly almost caused the death of my companions. Noah sneered. It's a pretty good way to protect yourself, isn't it? Haggard was speechless. Actually, there was one more thing he hadn't told Noah. Haggard had long predicted that a terrifying existence from Aslan had set his sights on the Surpassers. That person was Noah. Of course, Noah had indeed set his sights on the Surpassers. From the very beginning, Noah had come with the intention of settling the score with Haggard. That was why, to ensure that the Surpassers wouldn't be harmed by Noah, Haggard had Second Night send a decree to the humans in the name of God, claiming that a human named Noah would cause the extinction of the humans of Edris and that the kingdom of Edris would resist Noah. Who would have thought that right after that decision was made and Second Night sent the decree to the royal capital, Noah would appear? Among the group of Surpassers who were sent flying by Noah, there were a few who were lucky enough to be in the periphery and didn't suffer too much damage. That was why those Surpassers brought back news of Noah's destruction of the royal army of Edris. Knowing that he wouldn't be able to escape this time, Haggard could only resign himself to his fate and hope that he could be forgiven by Noah. No. That wasn't right either. I don't expect to be forgiven by you. Haggard finally faced Noah head-on for the first time and pleaded sincerely to Noah. I only hope that you won't make things difficult for my tribesmen. They don't know anything. I beg you. After saying that, Haggard actually knelt down in front of Noah and even knocked his head on the ground. Your Majesty. Please don't do this. Your Majesty. The Surpassers and the surroundings were all panicking. Only the Surpasser elders who supported Haggard knelt and kowtowed. I beg you. Please don't make things difficult for my tribesmen. Seeing the queen and the elder kneeling in front of a human, the Surpassers realized what kind of situation they were in. They all fell into a state of panic. Seeing Haggard and the Surpasser elders kneel before him for the sake of their tribesmen, Noah couldn't help but fall silent. At that moment, there was only one thought in Noah's mind. If he didn't have the power to resist the entire kingdom of Edris, would he kneel to Faust for the sake of his companions and the guild under the threat of Anima? The answer was, of course, yes. As long as it was for the guild, for his companions and for his family, Noah wouldn't even bat an eyelid if he had to be beheaded, let alone kneeling. But when that time came, wouldn't it mean that he had nowhere else to go? Wasn't Haggard and the Surpasser elders doing this because they had nowhere else to go? After all, the only difference between them and Noah was that they didn't have enough power to protect the people they cared about. Realizing this, Noah was even more determined to become stronger. At the same time, the anger in his heart had no choice but to dissipate. "Forget it," Noah said with a sigh and turned around. "Seeing that you're doing this for the sake of your tribesmen, I won't hold it against you." The moment those words left his mouth, before Haggard and the others could even rejoice, Noah's voice rang out. "But don't forget that you're not the only one who has something to protect. You can sacrifice the things that others need to protect for the things that you need to protect. Therefore, sooner or later, others will also sacrifice you for the things that they need to protect." After those words, Noah leaped into the air and soared into the sky with the help of Hermes's boots. The Surpassers were left behind in an indescribable silence. Chapter 1106. In the end, I came to Edris with a heart full of anger, only to teach a bunch of arrogant royal soldiers a lesson. After leaving Extania, Noah flew into the sky and stopped in mid-air. He couldn't help but smile bitterly as he recalled everything that had happened in less than 2 days in Edris. Noah had let Faust go for the sake of Mishgang. Noah had let Haggard go for the sake of a trace of resonance. Furthermore, the problem of Anima was about to be solved. Noah's trip this time was worth it. Of course, this was also because nothing had happened to Fairy Tale. If something had happened to Fairy Tale because of Anima, then no matter how close Mishgang and Noah were, and no matter how hard Haggard kowtowed, Noah wouldn't let the two of them go. Although, this is just a theory of results. Regardless, Noah's goal in coming to Edris had been accomplished. Now, all that was left was to wrap things up. With that thought in mind, Noah lifted his head and looked at the sky. Wang. No one knew if it was a good plan or not, but the sky that had become extremely dark suddenly surged up like water that had been boiled. Has it begun? As Noah muttered, the pitch-black clouds suddenly spun like a huge whirlpool. Not long after, a huge hole appeared in the center of the whirlpool-like dark clouds. Beep, beep, beep. Dazzling flashes of lightning began to flash from the huge hole. Whoosh! The howling wind also seemed to be stirring up a storm, causing the entire sky to become violent. Under such circumstances, from the ground below, streams of seemingly substantial air currents rose like steam without any warning. They were carried by the violent winds and soared into the sky. They were like streams of water that flowed into the huge hole in the sky. As the thick, substantial airflow was absorbed by the huge hole, the entire Idris underwent an earth-shattering change. Rumble. With Extania in the lead, the floating islands in the air suddenly lost their buoyancy for no reason and turned into huge meteors that slowly fell to the ground amidst a series of tremors. The floating islands were able to float in the air because of the mana contained in the ground of the floating islands. At that moment, whether it was the mana contained within the ground of the floating island or the mana contained within the vast land of the Edris continent, all of it was being reversed by the anima and turned into streams of dense air currents that flowed into the world of Aslan through the gigantic hole. Of course, this wasn't just limited to the mana contained in the earth. Even the mana stored in the magic crystals, magical weapons, and magical tools that humans extracted from the earth and created into magic crystals, magical weapons, and magical tools began to transform into streams of mana that rose into the sky. As a result, the imperial capital that was like a paradise with the support of magic fell into unprecedented chaos. The light-type magic crystals that acted as street lamps all lost their light. The fire-type magic crystals that acted as furnaces all lost their light. The wind-type magic crystals that acted as the driving system of transportation all lost their function. The water-type magic crystals that acted as the water source all stopped gushing out. The civilization of the imperial capital instantly returned to a state that was no different from ancient times, causing the residents who were immersed in enjoyment and convenience due to the existence of mana and magic to panic. It was as if they had encountered the end of the world, and their faces were filled with despair. Noah had expected all of this to happen a long time ago. That was why Noah wasn't the least bit surprised. However, the changes in the next second really surprised Noah. Why? He saw that Noah's body was emitting a gentle light that illuminated Noah's astonished face. Bang! However, in the next second, the light that enveloped Noah's entire body seemed to have been dispelled, and it exploded amidst a muffled sound. What's going on? Just as Noah fell into a state of shock, figures like Noah who were enveloped by the light began to float into the sky from Extania that was slowly falling to the ground. They were none other than the Transcendents. What? What's going on? What's going on? I can't control my body. Amidst the panicked voices, the group of surpassers led by Haggart was involuntarily carried by the light that enveloped their bodies and floated into the sky. Not long after, the Transcendents were all sucked into the Anima's hole while they were still in a state of panic. Seeing this, Noah immediately understood. Because of the reversal of Anima, what little magic power remained in Edras would be absorbed and flow towards Aslan. Regardless of whether it was Noah or the surpassers, they all had mana in their bodies. The super subspace magic Anima naturally had no way of extracting mana from a person's body. It could only absorb the mana along with the person's mana, including Noah. Unfortunately, Noah's curse resistance bounced off the effects of Anima. This resulted in the situation where only Noah could continue to stay in Edras. Well, in the beginning, I was planning on going back by myself through the void of Anima anyway. After understanding the changes in his body, Noah relaxed and lowered his head to look at the chaotic capital. At the very center of the imperial city, at the top of the tallest palace, a figure holding a magic staff stood against the wind. His eyes met with Noah's, and his lips moved a few times, as if he was trying to convey something. Noah naturally couldn't see Mishgang's lips from such a distance. However, Noah inexplicably understood what Mishgang was trying to say. Thank you. And goodbye. It was exactly the same words that Mishgang said to Noah in the magic workshop of Anima. Thus, Noah smiled. 7 years ago, Noah had coincidentally saved Mishgang, who had fainted from exhaustion after stopping Anima. From then on, they had formed a bond. 7 years later, Noah and Mishgang parted ways. As the Prince of Edras, Mishgang, who had been running around for Aslan for many years, had finally returned to his hometown. However, given Mishgang's personality, he would definitely be running around for Edras, which had fallen into chaos after losing his mana, right? At least, Noah believed that. Mishgang definitely had the ability to change this world called Edras. Thus, in their parting, there was reluctance and gratitude, but more than that, there was hope for the future. Under Mishgang's gaze, Noah looked in another direction as if he had a stroke of luck. There, a group of people were desperately waving at Noah, who was in the air. In their hands, there was a flag. It was a flag with a design that looked like a flying bird, but also like a fairy. The smile on Noah's face grew wider and wider, but he had no intention of flying down. Instead, he waved in the direction of the flag and looked at Mishgang, who was standing at the top of the palace. Then, he turned around and turned into a meteor, flying into the huge black hole in the sky. At this point, Noah's short journey in the world called Edras came to an end. Through the huge hole in the anima, Noah flew to the other end of the tunnel at an extremely fast speed. After flying for an unknown amount of time, Noah felt his vision being filled with light. Then, he flew out of the hole and passed through the clouds, returning to the familiar world. Noah, brother Noah. As soon as he flew out of the hole, Noah heard a burst of cheers. Looking down, he saw that in Magnoria, a group of fairy tale sorcerers were waving and cheering at Noah in unison. However, when the surpassing sorcerers were spat out of the hole one by one, all of them were stunned. After a while, earth-shattering screams rang out. Cat! Chapter 1107. At first, Noah was worried that the flow of time between Aslan and Edras would be different. In the past, he had left for less than an hour, but in the end, an entire month had passed in the world of fairy tale. Now, this was the first time that a case like this happened. This worry was not unfounded. In fact, Noah had been to two parallel worlds in the world of the M-shaped moon. One of the two parallel worlds was about 10 years ago, while the other was about 10 years later. Since Aslan and Edras were also parallel worlds, then there was a need to consider whether there would be problems with time between the two worlds. Fortunately, unlike the world of the M-shaped moon, the flow of time between Isrand and Edras was almost exactly the same. In other words, however long Noah spent in Edras, the same amount of time had passed in Isrand. Therefore, when Noah returned to Isrand from the world of Edras, it was already 1 or 2 days after the incident with Anima. Of course, compared to the other two things, this 1 or 2 days seemed so insignificant. One of these two things was naturally the arrival of the transcendence of Extania in Isrand. That day, the scene of a large group of cats like Hubby and Xiao Lulu descending from the sky really destroyed the worldview of many fairy tale sorcerers. This was especially so for Hubby and Xiao Lulu, who had only seen each other as fellow transcendents, and had not seen any other transcendents before this. However, compared to the people of fairy tale, the transcendents of Extania were actually very happy about their arrival in Isrand. After all, in Edras, the transcendents were bullied because they were too weak. In order to not be bullied, they had to tell the big lie of gods and angels. It was really quite tiring for them. To be able to leave that kind of world and come to a new magical world, for the transcendence of Extania, it was indeed like a new life. As for Hubby and Xiao Lulu, to be able to see so many of their fellow transcendents, they could not say that they were happy, but there were also some who seemed to be unhappy. It could be said that it was very complicated. The reason was naturally because Hubby and Xiao Lulu were thrown into the world of Isrand before they were even born. Perhaps it was because Hubby and Xiao Lulu had seen through the grudge in their hearts towards the transcendents. After meeting them, Hubby and Xiao Lulu seemed to have a lot to talk about in private. After that, Hubby and Xiao Lulu seemed to have untied a lot of the knot in their hearts and regained their vitality. The next day, Shagget led the entire race of surpassers away from fairy tale. Although the transcendents in fairy tale felt that it was very interesting to have the entire transcendents join the guild, it was a pity that the transcendents generally did not have high combat strength. If they only worked as archmages for a living, they would definitely not be able to support so many transcendents. Therefore, Hubby proposed to find another place to live and let the transcendents live a peaceful life. He led the transcendents away from fairy tale. Hubby and Xiao Lulu did not follow them. Hubby and Xiao Lulu also did not invite Hubby and Xiao Lulu to come with them. Presumably, the three of them had talked a lot before this. Therefore, when they left, they parted ways amidst laughter and laughter. However, in addition to Hubby and Xiao Lulu, there was another transcendent who stayed in fairy tale. Compared to the transcendents, this place is more suitable for me. Standing on top of a table, a black cat that looked no different from Hubby and Xiao Lulu said seriously. It looked more like a leopard cub than a cat. Also, I want to see what's so special about the place the prince has been staying in for so many years. Hearing that, the Transcendence in Fairy Tale welcomed it with open arms. Only Noah looked at the black cat that was no different from Hubby and Xiao Lulu in size. Then, he thought of the decisiveness and courage in the battle with him. His expression was somewhat strange. That black cat was none other than Lili, captain of the 2nd Magic War Unit of the Edra's army, Pansalili. Because Aslan's magic seemed to reject Lili's physique to a certain extent, it couldn't tolerate Lili's unique physique. Lili's body became like this when he passed through the anima. In that form, Lili's battle prowess was like heaven and earth compared to before. In his current form, although Lili's combat power was still much higher than Hades and Xiao Lulu's, there was still a gap between him and an ordinary magic shooter, not to mention the power that he possessed when he was the captain of the magic army like Alusa of Edras. Of course, Lili could still return to his original form through his own magic power. However, that form could only be maintained for a short period of time. But the moment he returned to his original form, Lili's battle prowess would instantly recover. By then, even if he couldn't compare to Alusha, Lili would definitely be able to match Naz and Grey. The Fairy Tale members who hadn't experienced Lili's battle prowess welcomed him with indifference. Only Noah looked at Lili's short stature and thought back to the youth's burly form. No matter how he looked at it, it felt weird. However, Noah understood Lili's words. Unlike the average surpasser, Lili had been in the royal army for a long time and had long been used to fighting and killing. Instead of leaving with the surpassers who stood aloof from worldly affairs, it was better to stay in the fairy tale. It was indeed more suitable for Lili. No one was happier about this than Gadjalu. Gadjalu came in front of Lili, who was standing on the table, and stared at him. After a while, he grinned.